Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've been debating for months whether to post this. My wife says I should, that maybe someone out there has seen the same thing. I've always been the rational type. I work in IT, I believe in science, and I've never been interested in paranormal stuff. But what happened to me last July has completely changed how I see the world. I'm an avid fly fisherman. Living in northern Arkansas gives me access to some amazing rivers, and the Spring River near Mammoth Spring has always been one of my favorite spots. I've been fishing there for over 15 years without incident, until July 3rd, 2022. It was early morning, maybe around 6:30. The summer heat hadn't kicked in yet, and there was that perfect morning stillness on the water. I'd driven out to a remote stretch I'd discovered a few years back. It takes about a 40-minute hike from where you can park, which means you rarely see another soul out there. I'd told my wife I'd be back around 4, packed a small lunch, and headed out with my gear. The fishing was decent that morning. I'd caught and released 3 rainbow trout and was feeling pretty content. Around 11, I decided to try a different spot where the river forks. I was wading along the shallow edge, maybe knee-deep in the water, when I first noticed something odd. There was a series of sharp cracking sounds, like twigs breaking, coming from that triangular patch of land between the river's branches. At first I figured it was probably a deer. We have tons of them around here, and they often come down to the water, but something about the rhythm of the sounds seemed off. I stopped casting and just listened. The breaking sounds continued, but they were more deliberate than a deer would make, more purposeful. I scanned the area, and that's when I saw it. About 60 yards away, near a pile of fallen branches, something was standing still. My first thought was that another fisherman had wandered into the area, though I was surprised since I'd never seen anyone else this far out. But as I focused on the figure, I realized something was very wrong. Whatever it was uniformly dark. A deep brown or black color from top to bottom, no variation like clothes would have. I remember my mouth going completely dry. My hand tightened around my fishing rod so hard, my knuckles went white. I just stood there, half submerged in the river, staring. Then it moved. That's when any possibility of it being human vanished completely. It stayed completely upright, walking on 2 legs, but the way it moved was different. There was this swaying motion to its gait, like its hips were rocking side to side more than a person's would, and it covered ground quickly, much more quickly than seemed possible for its size. Within seconds, it disappeared behind some shrubs. But the detail that still keeps me up at night was what it carried. In its right hand, if you can call it a hand, it held what looked like a heavy stick or thick branch. It wasn't dragging it or carrying it casually. It was holding it upright, almost like a staff or a weapon. I stood frozen in the water, unsure what to do. Part of me thought I should just continue fishing and ignore whatever I'd seen. Another part was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. While I was debating with myself, I lost sight of the figure, and for a moment I convinced myself I'd imagined it, or mistaken some natural formation for something else. That's when the real terror began. I'd been so focused on where I'd initially spotted the creature that I hadn't been scanning my surroundings. When I finally turned to look back toward my side of the river, my heart nearly stopped. The thing had somehow crossed the river, without making a sound that I'd noticed, and was now on my side, maybe 50 feet back from the bank, partially hidden among the trees. It was following me. As I watched, it moved from tree to tree, never fully exposing itself, but keeping pace with where I stood in the river. It wasn't rushing, but there was a deliberate quality to its movements that made it clear I was being stalked. My fishing rod suddenly felt ridiculously inadequate in my hands. I started to slowly back up, moving deeper into the river, thinking maybe it wouldn't follow me into the water. That's when it did something that made my blood turn to ice. It raised the stick it was carrying and shook it forcefully, like it was making some kind of warning or threat. And then it growled. I've heard all kinds of animals in these woods, bears, cougars, you name it. But this sound was different. It was deep, almost like it was coming from the bottom of a well, but powerful enough that I could feel it in my chest. My hair literally stood on end. I always thought that was just an expression until I felt it happen. With it partially out in the open now, I could see it more clearly. Its entire body was covered in coarse, dark hair, not fur exactly, longer and more matted. Its arms were thick and long, hanging lower than a human's would. Its shoulders were massive, and its head seemed to sit directly on them with no visible neck. But it was the face that I can't forget. Though covered with the same dark hair, I could see leathery skin underneath. A dark grey or black colour, and the eyes, completely dark, fixed directly on me with an intelligence that was unmistakable. I knew with absolute certainty that I was being warned. This thing was telling me to leave its territory. I began to carefully back away, moving across the river toward the trail that would lead back to my truck. Every instinct told me not to run, that running would trigger a chase response, but every cell in my body was screaming at me to sprint for my life. I compromised by moving as quickly as I could while trying to appear calm. I didn't dare turn my back on it until I absolutely had to. When I reached the opposite bank, I risked a quick glance behind me to find the path, then looked back. It had moved closer to the water's edge, but hadn't entered the river. Those dark eyes were still fixed on me. Finally, I reached the tree line where the path began. Only then did I turn and move as fast as I could without actually running. The path wasn't wide, just enough for one person to walk comfortably, and it was surrounded by dense forest on both sides. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves had me flinching. I kept expecting to feel a hand on my shoulder or hear that growl right behind me. It took me 25 minutes to reach my truck, a hike that should have taken 40. I was drenched in sweat despite the cool river water still soaking my waders. When I finally saw my truck through the trees, I abandoned all pretense and ran the final stretch, fumbling with my keys with shaking hands before practically diving inside and locking the doors. I sat there for several minutes, engine running, just trying to catch my breath and process what had happened. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see that figure emerge from the tree line. But nothing appeared. The drive home is mostly a blur. I remember calling my wife to say I was coming back early, trying to keep my voice steady. When I got home, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told her everything. I expected disbelief or concern for my mental health. Instead, she believed me immediately. She said she'd never seen me so genuinely shaken, and that she knew I wouldn't make something like this up. For weeks, I told no one else. I couldn't sleep properly, and when I did, I had nightmares about being followed through endless woods. Finally, about a month later, I worked up the courage to tell my father during a fishing trip much closer to civilization. His reaction shocked me. Instead of surprise, he nodded knowingly and admitted he'd been researching Bigfoot encounters for years. He showed me his collection of reports from all over Arkansas, particularly concentrated around river systems and heavily wooded areas like where I'd been. Some reports even mentioned these creatures carrying sticks and using them to hit trees or the ground. I've done my own research since then. I've read about hundreds of sightings across North America with details that match what I saw. The height, the hair, the gait, the stick-carrying behavior. It's all been reported before. I still go fishing. I love it too much to give it up completely, but I've changed my habits. I stay closer to access roads now. I never venture off established trails, and I absolutely never fish alone in remote areas anymore. Some people might call it paranoia, but I call it respect. That day, I learned whose territory I was really in, and it wasn't mine. I don't know what to call what I saw. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that it exists. It's intelligent, and it very clearly didn't want me there. Sometimes I wonder if it could have hurt me, but chose not to, just warned me instead. Other times I wonder if I was just lucky to have made it out. I've never gone back to that specific spot on the Spring River, and I never will. Some places belong to them, not us. I learned that lesson the hard way. Story 2. I've been a truck driver for 27 years now. I've hauled just about everything across 48 states and seen all kinds of weird shit on the road. Wildlife crossing, drunk drivers swerving, even a small plane making an emergency landing once. But what I saw that night in October of 2011 still makes the hair on my neck stand up, and I've never been able to explain it. I was hauling building supplies from Albany down to Margaretville in the Catskills. It was late, probably around 11:30 at night, and the roads were mostly empty. Route 30 gets pretty dark out there. No streetlights, just dense forest on both sides, and more stars than you'd believe if you're used to city skies. The moon was nearly full, which helped visibility, but those mountain roads still demand your full attention. The cab of my Peterbilt was warm against the fall chill outside. I remember I had the radio on low, some classic rock station that was starting to break up in the mountains. I wasn't particularly tired, had my thermos of coffee, and was actually enjoying the peaceful drive. These solo night runs can be therapeutic sometimes. I just rounded a bend when I noticed headlights gaining on me from behind. Another semi, moving faster than I was. No big deal. The road straightened out, and he pulled into the left lane to pass me. Standard procedure. I even flashed my lights when he cleared my front end to let him know he was good to move back into the lane. That's when it happened. Without any warning, something burst out from the tree line on the right side of the road. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was just a massive dark shape, moving impossibly fast. The truck passing me slammed on his brakes, his trailer starting to jackknife. I hit my brakes too, instinctively, feeling my rig shudder as the load shifted behind me. In the combined glare of our headlights, I saw it clearly for maybe 3 seconds total, but those seconds are burned into my memory like a brand. It wasn't a deer, it wasn't a bear. It was upright on 2 legs, but moving with a speed that made no sense for its size. This thing crossed the entire width of Route 30, both lanes plus shoulders, in just 2 strides. 2. Do you understand what I'm saying? Its legs were massive, powerful, covered in dark hair that seemed longer on the thighs. But what really got me were the proportions. Its arms hung down unnaturally long, the hands, and they were hands, not paws, nearly brushing its knees as it ran. The shoulders were impossibly wide, like a linebacker times 2. The whole body was covered in this flowing dark hair, not fur exactly, more like human hair but longer and thicker. For just a split second as it reached the middle of the road, it turned its head toward my truck. That's when I saw its face. God, that face. It was broad, almost human-like in structure, but definitely not human. Dark eyes that caught the headlights. The face was covered in hair, except around the eyes and mouth. The mouth seemed almost like a grimace, showing what might have been teeth, but I couldn't tell for sure. It was tall. I'm not talking basketball player tall. I mean it had to be at least 8 feet, maybe 9, and built like nothing I've ever seen. Not bulky like a bear, but muscular and proportioned like some prehistoric version of a human. Then it was gone, disappearing into the woods on the other side of the road like it had never been there. My truck had almost come to a complete stop by then. The other trucker had managed to straighten out his rig, but was pulled over on the shoulder ahead of me. I pulled over too, my hands shaking so bad I could barely work the gear shift. I noticed another set of headlights behind us. A third truck had come around the bend and stopped as well. I sat there for a minute just trying to catch my breath. My heart was pounding like it was trying to break my ribs. I couldn't make sense of what I'd just seen. I've spotted plenty of wildlife on night drives, deer, bears, coyotes, but this was something else entirely. Finally, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped down from my cab. The air was cold and smelled like pine and exhaust. The other two drivers were already out of their trucks and standing in the road, looking toward the woods where the thing had disappeared. The first guy, the one who'd been passing me, was a younger driver, maybe 35, named Mike. He was pale as a ghost, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. The other driver was an older guy, probably in his 60s, named Ray. I'd seen him at truck stops before, but never really talked to him. "Did you fucking see that?" Mike asked as soon as I approached. His voice was higher than normal, strained. I nodded, unable to find words right away. My flashlight beam swept across the road, looking for, I don't know what, footprints, hair, some evidence that we hadn't all hallucinated the same thing. "Something ran across," Ray said quietly. "Something big." "That wasn't just something big," I finally managed to say. That was... Don't say it," Mike cut me off. "Don't fucking say it." We all knew what we were thinking. There's only one thing it could have been, based on the size, the way it moved, the appearance. But saying Bigfoot out loud felt ridiculous, like we'd be admitting we were crazy or making up stories. Ray walked to the edge of the road where the creature had emerged from the forest. He was shining his own flashlight into the underbrush. "Look at this," he called. Mike and I walked over. The brush was trampled, branches broken on several small trees. Whatever came through here was powerful and didn't care about being subtle. Ray's flashlight beam caught something else, a tuft of dark hair snagged on a broken branch about 6 feet off the ground. "That's not bear," Ray said quietly. "Bears don't leave hair that high up unless they're standing, and they don't run through brush standing up." Mike reached for the hair, but I grabbed his wrist. "Don't," I said. "Just, let's leave it." He looked at me like I was crazy. "We need proof, man." "Proof for who?" I asked. "Who the hell would believe us anyway?" We stood there for maybe 10 more minutes, all of us reluctant to get back in our trucks. Nobody wanted to say it, but I think we were all afraid that thing might come back, or worse, that there might be more of them in the woods around us. Finally, Ray suggested we continue to the truck stop in Roxbury. It was only about 20 minutes up the road, and none of us felt like being alone right then. We agreed and got back in our rigs, forming a small convoy for the rest of the drive. That truck stop was pretty quiet when we arrived. Just a few other drivers sleeping in their cabs and a single waitress at the all-night diner section. We grabbed a booth in the corner, ordered coffee, and just sat there in silence for a while. "I've been driving these roads for 34 years, Ray finally said. "Seen all kinds of wildlife. That wasn't any animal I've ever seen before." Mike was still jittery, on his 3rd cup of coffee and 2nd cigarette since we'd sat down. "It was so fucking fast," he kept saying. "How can something that big move that fast? I remember thinking about the way it ran, that strange gait with the long arms swinging. If we tell anyone about this, they'll think we're crazy," I said. "Or drunk." Ray nodded slowly. "My dispatcher already thinks I'm getting too old for this job. If I start talking about monsters in the Catskills, he'll have me retired by the end of the week." "So what? We just pretend it didn't happen?" Mike asked, his voice rising slightly. The waitress glanced over at us, and we all went quiet until she turned away. "I'm not saying that," I told him. "I'm just saying, be careful who you tell." We sat in that booth until nearly 3 in the morning, going over what we'd seen again and again, comparing details, trying to convince ourselves there was some rational explanation. But there wasn't. We all saw the same thing, and none of us could explain it away. Before we parted ways, we exchanged numbers. Ray and Mike both decided they weren't going to tell anyone else. "Not worth the hassle," Ray said. "Nobody would believe it anyway." But I couldn't let it go that easily. What we saw was real. I've been on that stretch of Route 30 dozens of times since then, always scanning the tree line, always half expecting to see that massive shape burst from the woods again. It never has, at least not when I've been driving. I did some research afterward. Turns out the Catskills have a long history of Bigfoot sightings going back generations. The local Native American tribes even had stories about giant, hairy men in the mountains. Most people treat these as campfire tales, but I know better now. Over the years, I've cautiously mentioned my experience to a few other drivers, especially ones who regularly run routes through that area. Most laugh it off or think I'm pulling their leg. But occasionally, I'll see something change in someone's expression, a flicker of recognition, maybe even relief that they're not alone. 3 different drivers have privately shared similar stories with me. One woman told me she'd seen something matching my description near Phoenicia, just a few miles from where we had our encounter. Another guy swore he'd found massive, human-like footprints near a rest stop off Route 28. I still drive that route sometimes. I'd be lying if I said I don't get a knot in my stomach every time I pass that particular stretch of road, especially at night. I slow down a little, watching the tree line more carefully than I probably should while driving. Sometimes I think I see movement in the woods, but it's never been anything I could definitively point to. Mike called me about 6 months after our encounter. He'd quit long-haul driving and taken a local delivery job in Buffalo. He wouldn't say it directly, but I could tell our experience had rattled him more than he wanted to admit. Ray passed away 2 years ago, heart attack in his sleep. I went to his funeral, and his widow mentioned that he'd become interested in cryptozoology in his later years, though she never knew why. As for me, I'm still driving, still hauling loads across the country, still watching the dark places along the roadside. I don't know what we saw that night in October, but I know it was real. Whatever it was, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, some undiscovered species. It's out there in those mountains, moving between the trees, watching the roads. And sometimes on quiet nights, when I'm driving through forested areas, I catch myself checking my mirrors more often, half expecting to see a large, hairy figure with long arms and a broad face running alongside my truck with impossible speed. Story 3. I've been debating whether to post this for years now. I guess I needed time to process it, but honestly, I'm not sure I ever will. This happened back in August of 2017, and it still messes with me almost daily. My buddy Tyler and I both experienced it, and we've talked about it countless times since, trying to convince ourselves it wasn't what we think it was. But we both know what we saw. For context, Tyler and I worked at this warehouse outside of Ricketts Glen State Park in Pennsylvania. We were on the late shift that ended at 11 at night. It was a Thursday in mid-August, and it had been one of those perfect summer nights. Not too hot, clear skies, nearly full moon. After our shift, we were both feeling kind of restless. We'd been cooped up inside all evening, and neither of us felt like going straight home yet. "Let's just drive around for a bit," Tyler suggested. I was down for it. We both loved the outdoors, and we'd occasionally hit up some of the trails during daylight hours when we had time off together. We were driving along this winding road that skirts the edge of the state park when Tyler pulled into this little gravel pull-off area. There were no other cars there. Not surprising given it was approaching midnight on a weeknight. The pull-off had this small trail that led into the woods. During the day, it was a short walk to a nice view, nothing strenuous. We'd been there a couple times before. "Want to stretch our legs?" Tyler asked. I remember hesitating for just a second. Something felt different that night, but I brushed it off as just being tired from work. "Yeah, sure. Just for a few minutes, though." We got out of the car, and I remember noticing how bright everything was from the moonlight. You could see pretty well without flashlights, though we both had our phones with the flashlight function if needed. The air felt different too, super still and heavy, like right before a storm, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. We started up the trail, talking about some drama from work. Nothing important, just casual conversation. We'd only gone maybe 2 or 3 minutes up the trail when everything changed. There was this loud crack sound, like someone had snapped a thick branch, and I mean thick, Not some twig breaking under a squirrel's weight. This was like the sound of someone breaking a baseball bat in half. We both stopped immediately, and then I noticed the silence. Complete and utter silence. No insects chirping, no leaves rustling, nothing. If you've spent any time in the woods at night, you know that's not normal. There's always some kind of ambient noise. "Did you hear that?" Tyler whispered, though I'm not sure why he was whispering. It just felt necessary. I nodded, and we both instinctively looked ahead up the trail. That's when I saw it, and my entire body went cold. About 30 yards ahead, just off the trail but clearly visible in the moonlight filtering through the trees, was this shape, a massive shape, standing upright. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. A bear, but no. This thing was standing on two legs, completely upright, and the proportions were all wrong. It had these incredibly broad shoulders, way broader than any human I've ever seen, and the height, Jesus. I'm 6'1", and this thing had to be at least 7 or 8 feet tall. The silhouette was unmistakably humanoid, but absolutely massive. I could make out that it was covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. Not patchy like a mangy bear, but uniform all over its body. It was just standing there, partially hidden behind a thick tree trunk, but clearly watching us. Tyler grabbed my arm so hard I had bruises the next day. Neither of us said a word. We couldn't. It felt like my throat had closed up. And then, and this is the part that still makes my skin crawl, a second figure moved into view beside the first one. This one was slightly smaller, maybe 6.5 feet tall, but with the same general shape, both standing upright, both covered in dark hair, both with these impossibly wide shoulders and long arms that hung down past where knees would be on a human. For what felt like forever but was probably only 20 or 30 seconds, we all just stood there, us staring at them staring at us. I couldn't see facial features clearly from that distance in the moonlight, but I could tell when the smaller one turned its head directly toward us. The movement was so deliberate, so aware. And then it happened. The smaller one made this weird huffing sound, not quite a grunt, not quite a snort. And they both moved. Holy shit, did they move? 1 second they were standing still, the next they were crashing through the woods at an incredible speed. They ran on 2 legs, but with this slight forward lean, their long arms swinging with each stride. The way they moved through the dense underbrush was terrifying, not clumsy like a human would be, but powerful and efficient, like they knew exactly where to place each step, despite moving so fast. Branches snapped and vegetation crunched as they disappeared into the darkness, but they made no vocalizations. The sound of them moving through the forest faded quickly, which was shocking considering how much noise they initially made. It was like they knew how to go silent when they wanted to. Tyler and I didn't even discuss what to do next. Pure instinct took over. We turned and ran. I've never moved so fast in my life. I remember my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode, and this metallic taste in my mouth from fear. We sprinted back to the car without looking back once. Tyler fumbled with the keys for a second before getting the car started, and we peeled out of that pull-off like we were being chased. For all we knew, we were. The drive home was completely silent. Neither of us said a single word. I kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced I would see something following us. But there was nothing. When we got back to my place, Tyler was crashing on my couch that week. We just sat in the parked car for maybe 5 minutes, engine off, still not talking. Finally, Tyler looked at me and said, "What the fuck was that?" His voice was shaking. I didn't answer right away. What could I say? Eventually, I just shook my head and replied, "I don't know, man, but that was a lie." Deep down, I think we both knew exactly what we had seen. We just couldn't bring ourselves to say it out loud yet. We barely slept that night. Every sound outside my apartment had us on edge. The next morning, over coffee, we finally talked about it properly. "Those weren't bears," Tyler said flatly. "Bears don't stand like that, and they don't move like that." And they weren't people in costumes, I added. No way. The proportions were all wrong, and nobody could move that fast through dense woods at night in a costume. We went back and forth like this, eliminating every possible explanation until we were left with only one. We had seen two Bigfoot, a larger one and a smaller one, maybe a parent and offspring or a male and female. I don't know. The way they moved is what sticks with me the most. The raw power and speed. These weren't lumbering creatures. They were agile and fast despite their size, and the way they just stood there watching us, there was intelligence behind that observation. They were assessing us, deciding what to do. That's what makes it so unsettling. In the days after, we debated reporting it, but to who? The park rangers? The police? What would we even say? Hey, we were trespassing in the state park after hours and saw Bigfoot. Yeah, right. They'd either think we were pranking them or that we'd been drinking or something. We did go online and look up Bigfoot sightings in Pennsylvania. Turns out there have been quite a few in that general area over the years. I found reports from other people describing almost exactly what we saw. The height, the build, the movement. It was validating but also terrifying to realize we weren't alone in this experience. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. I kept replaying that moment in my head, the crack of the branch, the silence, those massive shapes in the moonlight. I became obsessed with looking up Bigfoot encounters and studies. I learned about how they're said to communicate by tree knocking, breaking branches to signal each other. That first loud crack we heard, I'm convinced now it was a warning about our presence. Tyler and I still talk about it sometimes, though less frequently as the years have passed. He moved to Ohio last year, but we still text about it when something triggers the memory. Neither of us has gone back to that trail, and honestly, I don't go hiking at night anywhere anymore. Something about the woods after dark just feels different now, knowing what might be watching from between the trees. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I know how it sounds. Before this happened, I would have been skeptical too. But I know what I saw, what we both saw. Two creatures that shouldn't exist according to science, but were undeniably there in those woods that night. Sometimes I wonder if they were as startled by us as we were by them. Were they just going about their night when these two humans stumbled into their territory? Was the smaller one more curious about us, which is why it looked directly at us? These questions haunt me. I still live in Pennsylvania, still work near those woods, but I view them differently now. There's a whole world out there that most people never see or acknowledge, things that exist in the shadows of our normal lives. I was given a glimpse of it that night, and I'm still trying to make sense of it. If you've had a similar experience, I'd love to hear about it. Sometimes I feel like I'm going crazy remembering this. But then I talk to Tyler, and he confirms every detail, exactly as I remember it. We saw something that night that changed us, something real, something unexplainable, and they're still out there. Story 4. I've been debating whether to share this for years. Even now, my hands are shaking as I type this out. I'm not looking for anyone to believe me. Honestly, I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't been there. But I need to get this off my chest. This happened about 4 summers ago when I was camping alone near Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee. I've always been an outdoors person. Nothing extreme, just your average guy who enjoys some solitude in nature occasionally. I have this old Dodge Caravan that I converted into a mini camper. Threw a mattress in the back, built some basic storage. Nothing fancy, but comfortable enough for weekend trips. I found this small lake that wasn't on most maps, tucked away from the main camping areas. Perfect spot. Quiet, secluded, and absolutely beautiful. No cell service, which was exactly what I wanted. Just me, my thoughts, and nature. The first night was amazing. Clear skies, stars like you wouldn't believe, and that wonderful silence you only get away from civilization. I slept with the back hatch cracked for fresh air and only woke up once to the sound of something small scurrying outside, probably just a raccoon. I woke up early the next morning, around 5:30. The sun was just starting to rise, and I was excited to get my day started. I set up my little camp stove to make coffee and threw together some instant oatmeal. While waiting for the water to boil, I noticed this gorgeous mist rising off the lake. The way the early morning light was hitting it, man, it was like something from a nature documentary. My phone was nearly dead, but I figured I had enough battery for a few photos. There was this old rock wall about 50 yards down a narrow path that I thought would make the perfect spot for pictures. The wall overlooked the lake at a slight elevation, giving a better view than from my campsite. I grabbed my phone and headed down, leaving my coffee water to heat up. The forest was so quiet, just birds starting to wake up and that soft sound of water lapping at the shore. The ground was damp with dew, and I remember my shoes getting wet as I walked through the tall grass. When I reached the rock wall, I paused to take in the view. That's when I noticed something across the lake where the shoreline curved around. At first glance, I thought it was a bear. We get plenty of black bears in Tennessee, and I've seen them before while hiking. It was a dark brown shape, partially obscured by some low-hanging branches. Then I heard splashing, not like a fish jumping, but deliberate sounds, like someone moving their hands through water. That struck me as odd because bears usually don't play in water like that. I raised my phone to take a picture, using the zoom to get a better look. What happened next? I still struggled to process it. The thing suddenly stood upright on two legs, not like a bear rearing up, but smoothly, naturally, like a person standing from a crouching position. I was so startled I fumbled my phone and dropped it on the rocks. It didn't break, thankfully, but I completely forgot about taking pictures after that. I just stood there frozen, staring at this creature. Because once it stood up, there was no way it was a bear. Not even close. It was massive. I'm talking 7, maybe 8 feet tall, and the proportions were all wrong for any animal I've ever seen. Its shoulders were incredibly broad and square, like a linebacker wearing pads, but this was clearly its natural build. The morning sun was hitting it from behind, creating this weird silhouette effect, but I could see thick, dark brown hair covering its entire body. The hair had this slight shine to it where the sunlight caught it directly. The thing started moving toward the tree line, taking these long, purposeful strides. Then it stopped. That's when my blood ran cold. It turned around, not just its head, but its entire upper body, and looked directly at me. I swear to God, it made eye contact, deliberate eye contact, for several seconds that felt like an eternity. Then it was gone, just disappeared into the woods without making a sound, which is impossible for something that size. There should have been crashing, branches breaking, something, but there was nothing, just complete silence. I suddenly realized I was completely alone, miles from the nearest person, and whatever that thing was could easily circle around the lake to where I was. That thought hit me like a punch to the gut. I ran as fast as I've ever run in my life, back to my campsite. I didn't even bother packing properly, just threw my stove, still hot, into a plastic bin, stuffed my sleeping bag in haphazardly, and tossed everything into the van. I left my camp chair behind and didn't even realize until I was miles away. The whole time I was throwing stuff in the van, I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the tree line, convinced I was being watched. Every sound made me jump, a bird taking flight, a branch swaying in the breeze. I kept thinking I saw movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, nothing was there. I peeled out of there so fast, I'm surprised I didn't blow a tire on the rough access road. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept checking my mirrors obsessively, half expecting to see that thing running after my van. I drove for about 30 minutes before I felt safe enough to stop in a grocery store parking lot. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even text my brother. I just sat there, trying to process what I'd seen, trying to rationalize it. But I couldn't. What I saw wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person in a suit. The way it moved was too fluid, too natural. The proportions were all wrong for a human. Those arms hung down to its knees, and no costume could replicate the muscle definition I saw when it turned. The eyes are what haunt me the most. They weren't animal eyes. There was intelligence there, awareness. It knew I was watching it, and it wanted me to know that it saw me too. I've spent countless hours since then looking up information about Bigfoot sightings in Tennessee. Turns out the Cherokee National Forest has a long history of strange encounters. I've talked to locals who have stories they don't share widely because they don't want to be labeled as crazy. For 3 years, I avoided that lake completely. I'd still go camping, but always in established campgrounds, always with other people nearby. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched whenever I was in the woods alone. Last year, I finally worked up the courage to go back. I convinced my buddy Mike to come along, told him it was just a beautiful spot I'd found years ago. I didn't mention what happened. I figured having another person would make me feel safer, and honestly, I needed to face whatever fear had settled in me since that morning. We camped in the exact same spot. Nothing unusual happened during that trip, but I barely slept. Every noise outside the van had me wide awake, heart racing. Mike kept asking why I was so jumpy. I made up some excuse about a bad experience with coyotes once. Around 2 in the morning, we heard wood knocking in the distance. 3 distinct knocks, then silence. Mike thought it was probably a woodpecker, but at 2 a.m., I know what it was. It wasn't the first time I'd heard those knocks in Tennessee forests. About a year before the lake incident, I was hiking with my dog when we heard similar knocks followed by this howl that made my dog whimper and press against my legs. That sound wasn't made by any animal native to these woods. I still go camping, still hike these forests, but something fundamental has changed in how I experience the outdoors. I'm constantly aware that we might not be alone out there, that there might be things watching us from the trees that science hasn't acknowledged. I don't know what I saw that morning. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever name you want to give it. All I know is that it was real, it was intelligent, and sometimes when I'm alone in the woods, I get this prickling sensation on the back of my neck like I'm being observed. I haven't told many people this story. Most would think I'm crazy or making it up. Maybe writing it out like this will help me process it better. All I know is that morning changed something in me. My understanding of what's possible, what might be living alongside us in the wild places. And whenever someone dismisses Bigfoot stories as hoaxes or misidentifications, I just nod and stay quiet. Because unless you've seen one yourself, stared into those eyes, felt that primal fear of being the one observed rather than the observer, you just can't understand. Story 5. I still get chills thinking about what happened that night in June 2001. I've never told this story to anyone outside my family because honestly, who would believe me? But it's been over 20 years now, and I need to get this off my chest. I was 17 at the time. My family and I had spent the day at my dad's uncle's farm near Herman, Missouri. It was one of those summer visits where you eat too much, listen to old stories, and stay way later than planned. By the time we left, it was close to midnight. Dad decided to take this old dirt shortcut back to the main highway instead of the longer paved route. It was a road he knew well from growing up in the area, a winding path through low hills with dense trees and old fences running along both sides. Mom wasn't thrilled about it, especially so late, but Dad insisted it would save us at least 40 minutes. "We'll be home before 2 if we take the river road," he said. I remember, because I checked my watch when he said it. My little sister Lily was already passed out in the back seat next to me, her head leaning against the window, completely dead to the world. I was fighting sleep myself, watching the headlights bounce off the trees as Dad's old pickup rattled down the road. The truck was this ancient blue Chevy that smelled like oil, and the cigarettes Dad used to smoke before Mom made him quit. It must have been around 2 in the morning when we started heading down this long, steep hill. The road was well maintained for a dirt road, but it was still rough, and the truck's suspension wasn't what it used to be. Every bump jolted through the whole vehicle. The moon was bright that night, nearly full, casting this eerie silver glow over everything. Even with that natural light, it was still incredibly dark between the trees. At the bottom of the hill was this narrow bridge crossing a deep creek bed, one of those tributaries that eventually feeds into the Missouri River. It wasn't much of a bridge, really, just concrete with metal guardrails on either side, probably only wide enough for one vehicle at a time. As we approached, Dad slowed down to about 45 miles per hour. I wasn't really paying attention until our headlights swept across the bridge. That's when I saw it. There was someone, pressed against the guardrail on the right side of the bridge. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. A stranded motorist, maybe. But as we got closer, I realized what I was seeing wasn't human. Not entirely. This thing was huge. I'm talking 7, maybe 8 feet tall, standing on 2 legs against that guardrail, like it was trying to hide but had nowhere to go. Its build was massive, thick from shoulder to hip in a way that didn't look right. Not fat, but solid, powerful. The whole body was covered in this reddish-brown hair, long and matted like an old farm dog that hasn't been brushed in months. As our truck approached, the headlights illuminated it fully, and I found myself looking directly at its face. That's what still haunts me the most. It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't like the ape-like faces you see in Bigfoot documentaries or movies. This face was disturbingly human. It reminded me of an elderly man who'd spent his entire life working outdoors. Leathery skin with deep wrinkles under the eyes and around the mouth. The eyes themselves were dark, alert, and they blinked slowly in our headlights. The creature didn't move, not an inch. Its shoulders were hunched up high, and there was barely any visible neck. The head just seemed to sit directly on those massive shoulders. Its arms were pressed tight against its sides, and I could see these enormous hands gripping the guardrail. The knuckles looked swollen, and the fingers were abnormally long. We were going slow enough over that bridge that I had maybe 3 or 4 seconds to take all this in. We passed so close that if Mom had rolled down her window and reached out, she could have touched it. I'm not exaggerating. The truck is only so wide, and that bridge wasn't made for modern vehicles. As we cleared the bridge, I twisted around in my seat to look back. The creature hadn't moved, but its head had turned to follow our truck. I could see its silhouette against the moonlight, still pressed against that guardrail. "Dad," I finally managed to say. My voice came out as a croak. "Dad, did you see that?" Dad didn't answer right away. He was looking in the rearview mirror, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "See what?" Mom asked, turning to look at me. That thing on the bridge. We need to go back." "Go back?" Mom looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "What are you talking about?" "There was something on the bridge. It was huge, standing right there against the rail." Mom glanced at Dad, who still hadn't said anything. He just kept checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, driving a little faster than before. "It was probably just a bear," Mom said, but her voice had this uncertain edge to it. "Bears don't stand pressed against bridge railings like they're trying to hide from headlights," I said. "It had a face, Mom. It looked at me." Lily was still somehow asleep through all of this, which was probably for the best. "David?" Mom turned to Dad. "Did you see anything?" Dad cleared his throat. "Let's just get to the highway," was all he said. The rest of the drive down that dirt road was tense. Dad kept checking the mirror, and I kept looking out the back window, half expecting to see that thing following us. Mom kept telling me it was just shadows and my imagination, but I could tell she was rattled too. When we finally reached the highway, it felt like we'd escaped something. Dad turned on the radio, low so it wouldn't wake Lily, and we drove the rest of the way home in silence. I don't think any of us knew what to say. For weeks afterward, I tried to get my parents to talk about what happened. Dad would just change the subject, and Mom stuck to her probably a bear story, even though we all knew bears don't stand like that, don't have faces like that. I started researching, sneaking books from the library about cryptids and unexplained phenomena. I read everything I could find about Bigfoot sightings in Missouri. There were more than you'd think, especially around the river areas, but none of the descriptions matched exactly what I saw. The face was always wrong in the accounts. Too ape-like, too animal. What I saw had a face that was almost human, but not quite. It wasn't until almost 10 years later, after I'd moved away for college and started my own life, that Mom finally admitted the truth. I was home for Christmas, and Dad had gone to bed early. Mom and I were sitting at the kitchen table having a glass of wine when I brought it up again. "You remember that night on the river road?" I asked. "When I was 17? She got this look on her face, part fear, part relief that someone else was finally bringing it up. "I never forgot it," she said quietly. "Not for a single day." She told me how she'd seen it too, how the headlights had lit up its face as we drove by, how it had watched us with those two human eyes. She described the exact same details I remembered: the reddish-brown hair, the wrinkled face, the massive hands gripping the railing. "Your father saw it too," she admitted. "He didn't want to scare you kids more than you already were. He kept checking the mirror because he was afraid it was following us." I asked her what she thought it was. "I don't know," she said, "and I don't want to know. Some things aren't meant to be explained." That conversation with Mom confirmed what I'd always believed, that the Missouri river bottoms hide things that don't come out in daylight, things that most people never see. I've driven that road a few times since then, always during the day, always with a knot in my stomach. The bridge is still there, though they've widened it a bit. Every time I cross it, I can't help but look at that spot on the guardrail and remember those eyes watching our truck disappear into the night. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, moving through those woods at night. I wonder if other people have seen it and, like us, decided it was better not to talk about it. Because once you admit that something like that exists, you have to accept that the world is a much stranger place than most people are comfortable believing. I still have nightmares about that night sometimes. In them, I'm alone on that bridge in the moonlight, and I can hear heavy footsteps approaching from the trees. I always wake up before I see it, but I know what's coming. Some part of me knows that if I ever saw that face again, I'd recognize it instantly. Some things you just can't forget, no matter how hard you try. Story 6. I still can't explain what I saw that evening in Perry County. It's been 20 years, but I remember every detail like it happened yesterday. My fiancée Sarah and I were driving south on Highway 5 through Alabama in early November of 2003. We were heading back from visiting her parents in Birmingham, just making the usual drive we'd done dozens of times before. It was around 6:45 in the evening, already dark. The highway was pretty empty, just a long, straight stretch with dense woods on both sides. We had the radio on low, talking about wedding plans and other normal stuff. Nothing unusual about the night at all. Sarah was the one who spotted it first. We were coming around this gentle curve when she suddenly grabbed my arm. "Matt, slow down. Did you see that?" she said, pointing toward the tree line on the right side of the road. I hadn't seen anything, but the way her voice changed, from casual to dead serious in a split second, made me hit the brakes. I pulled onto the shoulder, leaving the headlights on. "What did you see?" I asked, peering through the windshield. "I don't know exactly. Something big moved at the edge of those trees, down that slope," she said. Her hand was still gripping my arm, fingers digging in. I remember feeling skeptical but curious. We were in the middle of nowhere after all. Probably just a deer or maybe a bear, I thought. But Sarah kept staring out the window, completely fixated. "I'm going to check it out," I said, reaching for the door handle. Sarah looked at me like I was crazy. "Are you serious? What if it's dangerous?" "I'll just take a quick look. Stay in the car with the doors locked," I told her, already stepping out. The night air hit me, chilly, damp, with that distinct fall smell. The highway was eerily quiet, except for the occasional car passing by in the distance. Our headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the first few yards of woods and underbrush. I walked slowly toward the edge of the road, then down the slight embankment toward the tree line. Something felt off. The woods seemed too quiet, no crickets, no rustling, nothing, just this heavy, waiting silence. I'd gone maybe 20 yards from the car when I first saw them, about 150 feet away, partially obscured by the trees but clearly visible on the hillside, were 4 figures. At first, my brain tried to make them into people, maybe hunters or hikers, but they weren't people, not even close. They were standing in what looked like a formation. 2 larger ones higher up on the slope and 2 smaller ones positioned below them. All 4 were completely black against the night backdrop, but I could see them clearly enough to know I was looking at something I couldn't explain. The taller ones were massive, easily 7 to 8 feet tall, with shoulders twice as wide as mine. Their arms hung down much lower than any humans would, nearly to their knees. The smaller ones were maybe 5 or 6 feet tall, but built similarly, just scaled-down versions of the larger ones. I froze, rooted to the spot. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to run back to the car, but I couldn't move. I just stood there watching them, and they seemed to be watching me too. For what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds, none of us moved. Then one of the larger creatures shifted position. It took a deliberate step to the side, moving with this fluid grace that was terrifying to see in something so big. It reached down toward one of the smaller ones in what looked like a protective gesture. That's when I realized I might be looking at a family of Bigfoot. The thought hit me like a truck. These weren't bears or any other animal I knew. They were something else entirely. I watched as one of the larger ones, maybe the male, reached between 2 trees. Its arm span was incredible, easily 8 feet or more as it gripped both trunks. The strength it must have had was unimaginable. Its entire body was covered in what looked like thick, dark brown hair or fur, not black as I'd first thought in the dim light. The creatures kept repositioning themselves, moving carefully on the hillside. They seemed to be communicating somehow, though I never heard any sounds. The smaller ones would occasionally crouch down, while the larger ones remained standing, as if keeping watch. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. I was completely entranced, terrified, but unable to look away. These were no costumes, no misidentified animals. Their movements were too deliberate, too coordinated. Then I remembered Sarah. I backed up slowly, never turning away from the creatures until I reached the car. Sarah had rolled down her window just a crack. "What is it?" she whispered, her face pale in the dashboard lights. "You need to see this," I whispered back, "but we need to be quiet." She hesitated, then slowly opened her door and stepped out. I pointed toward the hillside, where the creatures were still visible. Her sharp intake of breath told me she saw them too. "Oh my God," she whispered, clutching my arm. "What are they?" I think they're Bigfoot," I said, the words sounding ridiculous even as I said them. We stood there together, watching. Neither of us had phones with cameras back then. This was 2003 after all, and I've regretted that fact ever since. After a few more minutes, Sarah tugged at my sleeve. "Let's move a little closer. I want to see better." Every instinct told me to get back in the car and drive away as fast as possible, but curiosity won out. We carefully got back in the car, and I inched it forward along the shoulder, keeping the lights on, but trying not to make too much noise. That's when things changed. As soon as the car moved, one of the larger creatures immediately stood upright to its full height. Even from that distance, I could feel its awareness shift to us. It turned slightly, and with 3 enormous strides, it disappeared over the ridgeline of the hill. The movement was so smooth, so purposeful, like watching an athlete who knows exactly what they're doing. One of the smaller ones, which had been crouched down, suddenly stood up too. I got a clear look at its profile, a rounded head with a slight slope at the top, no visible neck, just this powerful transition from shoulders to head. Its face was flat and wide, with deep-set eyes under heavy brow ridges. The remaining two creatures began moving toward the ridge as well. Their gait was nothing like a human's, longer strides, more fluid, almost like they were gliding up the hill despite their size. "We need to go," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Now." I didn't argue. I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the highway, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. We drove in complete silence for at least 10 miles before either of us spoke. "Did that really just happen?" Sarah finally asked. "I think it did," I replied. My mouth was dry, and I could still see those creatures perfectly in my mind. The more we talked about it on the drive home, the more certain we became about what we'd seen. The proportions were all wrong for bears or any other animal. The way they moved, the obvious intelligence in their positioning and reactions. These weren't animals acting on instinct. They were thinking, coordinating, reacting. What struck me most was how solid they looked. These weren't the gangly, hunched creatures from Patterson-Gimlin film that everyone's seen. They had thick barrel chests and powerful builds. Their arms were massive, not just long, but thick with muscle, and the hair covering them wasn't scraggly or patchy. It was dense, uniform, like a well-kept coat. We told a few close friends about what happened, but most just laughed it off or suggested we'd seen bears. One friend even suggested we were making it up for attention. After a while, we stopped talking about it altogether, but I know what I saw. I've replayed that evening in my mind thousands of times. I've questioned myself, wondered if my eyes were playing tricks, considered every rational explanation. Nothing fits except the impossible. We saw a family of Bigfoot creatures that night. I've gone back to that stretch of highway a few times over the years, always in daylight, always with someone else. The area looks different somehow, smaller, less mysterious. I've never seen any signs of the creatures again, but I still get this prickle on the back of my neck whenever I drive through there. 20 years later, I still have dreams about those creatures. Sometimes I'm watching them from the roadside again. Other times, they're watching me through my bedroom window. I wake up from those dreams in a cold sweat. The image of those deep-set eyes under heavy brow ridges still vivid in my mind. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I probably wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. But I know what Sarah and I experienced that night was real. 4 creatures, moving with purpose and intelligence. A family unit of something science says doesn't exist. To this day, I can't explain it. I just know it happened. And sometimes, when I'm driving on a dark highway with woods on either side, I find myself scanning the tree line, wondering if they're out there, watching and waiting. Story 7. I've been debating for months whether to share this. I'm not someone who believes in monsters or cryptids or whatever you want to call them. I've always been the skeptical type who needs evidence before believing in anything. But what happened to me last May has completely changed my perspective on what might be living in our forests. This happened on May 12, 2018, in Harbison State Forest near Columbia, South Carolina. I go there pretty regularly for evening walks when the weather's nice. That particular evening was beautiful, around 70 degrees, clear skies, with that golden sunlight filtering through the trees. I decided to take advantage of it and go for a longer walk than usual. I'm familiar with most of the trails there, but that evening I wanted to explore a bit further than I normally go. I ended up walking past the old radio building, locals will know the one, and followed the path that goes toward where the power lines cross the broad river. It's a bit secluded, but I'd been there a couple times before and knew it offered a really pretty view of the water. When I reached the spot where the riverbank drops off, I stopped to catch my breath and enjoy the view. The bank is steep there, probably drops about 15 feet down to the water. I was standing at the edge looking out over the river when something caught my eye downstream. About 250 feet away, there was what I initially thought was a person standing by the water's edge. My first thought was that it was another hiker who had found a way down to the river, maybe fishing or just enjoying the evening like I was. but something felt off about the figure. It wasn't moving like a person would. I squinted, trying to get a better look, and that's when I realized what I was seeing wasn't human at all. It was covered in dark hair. Not like a bear, more like a shaggy coat that had this weird reddish shine where the evening sun hit it. And it was standing completely upright at the water's edge. I froze. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The creature, I don't know what else to call it, was massive. Even from that distance, I could tell it was huge. Its arms hung down much longer than a person's would, and its back and shoulders were incredibly wide and muscular looking. As I stood there staring, it turned and started pushing through the tall grass and reeds near the water. The way it moved was both familiar and alien at the same time, like a person walking, but with this powerful, fluid motion that no human could replicate. My brain was still trying to process what I was seeing. A bear? No, definitely not. This thing was walking on two legs naturally, not like a bear that occasionally stands up. Some guy in a costume, out here, alone, in a relatively remote part of the forest. That didn't make sense either. I realized I should take a picture. Who would believe this without evidence? I slowly reached for my phone in my pocket, trying not to make any sudden movements, though I don't know why. I was so far away, I didn't think it could possibly see me. I was wrong. As soon as I moved, the creature turned its head toward me. I swear to God it looked directly at me. I don't know how it sensed me from that distance, whether it heard me or smelled me or what, but it knew I was there, and it stopped dead in its tracks. For a few seconds we just stared at each other. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then it let out this sound. I can only describe it as a growl, but it was deeper and louder than any animal I've ever heard. It echoed across the water, and I felt it more than heard it. What happened next is what still gives me nightmares. The thing charged, not all the way toward me, but it ran halfway up the hill on its side of the river, moving with incredible speed through the brush. It stopped about halfway up, and I could see it clearly now. Its face was flat but protruding, almost like a gorilla but different. And its teeth, it had these large yellowish teeth that it was showing as it made that sound. Then it started displaying. There's no other word for it. It stomped on the ground, snapped branches off nearby bushes, and shook its massive arms, all the while making this deep rumbling noise that I could literally feel in my stomach, even from across the river. It was telling me to get the hell out of there. This was its territory, and I was not welcome. I couldn't move. I was completely frozen with fear. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I've never experienced terror like that before. It was like my mind separated from my body for a few seconds. Then finally, some survival instinct kicked in. I turned and ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. I didn't look back, didn't stop for anything. I could hear crashing sounds behind me, but I don't know if it was the creature following or just my imagination running wild. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, the only footsteps I could hear were my own. I kept running anyway, past the radio building, past other hikers who gave me strange looks, all the way back to the parking lot where my car was. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my keys out. I finally managed to unlock my car, jump inside, and lock the doors. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes just trying to breathe and process what had happened. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might be having a heart attack. When I finally calmed down enough to drive, I went straight home. I didn't tell anyone what happened at first. Who would believe me? I've replayed it in my mind thousands of times since then, wondering if I imagined it or if there was some rational explanation. But I know what I saw. The way it moved, the sounds it made, the intelligence in its reaction to me. This wasn't a bear or a misidentified known animal. It wasn't a person in a suit playing a prank. It was something else. I've done research since then, a lot of research. I've read accounts from other people who claim to have seen similar creatures. Some call it Bigfoot or Sasquatch. I don't know what to call it, but I know what I saw was real. I haven't been back to that part of Harbison since. I've gone back to the main trails a few times, always in broad daylight and always with other people around, but I can't bring myself to go near the river crossing again. The thing that sticks with me most is how it reacted to my presence. It wasn't just a wild animal responding to a threat. There was purpose behind its actions. It was warning me. It was communicating in its own way, telling me to stay away from its territory. That's what scares me the most, the intelligence behind those eyes. I don't expect everyone to believe me. I wouldn't have believed it myself if someone had told me this story before it happened. But I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't anything that's supposed to exist according to science. Since that day, I've become much more aware of my surroundings when I'm outdoors. I find myself listening more carefully to sounds in the woods, watching the tree line more intently. Every unusual sound makes me jump now. I don't think I'll ever feel completely comfortable in the forest again. I've thought about reporting it to authorities or researchers, but I'm afraid of the ridicule. I have a professional job, friends and family who respect me. I don't want to be known as the crazy person who claims they saw Bigfoot, so I've kept it to myself until now. I'm sharing this because I need to tell someone, and because I think people should know what might be out there. If you're hiking in Harbison, especially near the river, be aware of your surroundings. Don't go alone, especially not in the evening. And if you hear something that doesn't sound right, that deep rumbling growl that seems to come from everywhere at once, get out of there as fast as you can. I don't know what that creature was, but it was intelligent enough to warn me before attacking. Not all encounters might end that way. It could have easily crossed that river if it wanted to. I think about that a lot. Why it didn't come after me. Maybe it was just defending its space. Maybe it didn't want a confrontation any more than I did. The rational part of my brain still tries to explain it away sometimes. Maybe it was just a bear that my frightened mind transformed into something more human-like. Maybe it was some kind of elaborate hoax, but deep down, I know what I saw. I know it was real. There are things in our forests that we don't understand. Things that stay hidden most of the time. I was unlucky, or maybe lucky in a way, to catch a glimpse of one, but I'll never forget the way it looked at me, the way it moved, or the sound it made. Some things once seen can't be unseen. I still have nightmares about it. In them, I'm standing on that bank again, but this time when I turn to run, my feet won't move, and I hear it coming closer and closer behind me. I always wake up before I see its face again, but the fear is just as real as it was that day. I don't know if I'll ever fully process what happened or if I'll ever get answers. All I know is that my understanding of what exists in the world has fundamentally changed. There are things out there that we don't have explanations for, things that defy what we're taught to believe is possible. So if you're ever in those woods and you get that feeling that something's watching you, trust your instincts. They might just save your life. Story 8. I've debated for months whether to share this experience. I'm not the type who believes in monsters or spends time watching those cryptid hunting shows. I'm just a regular guy who spent 27 years driving semis across the country. Montana's Rocky Mountain routes were like a second home to me. I knew every bend, every lookout point, every truck stop. But what happened last October changed everything. It was supposed to be a routine haul, furniture from Seattle to Billings. I'd done this run hundreds of times. The weather report mentioned scattered thunderstorms, nothing unusual for that time of year. I remember checking my tires before leaving, filling my thermos with coffee, and kissing my wife Carol goodbye like any other day. The first signs of trouble came around 6 in the evening. The sky darkened rapidly, much faster than normal. The radio started crackling with storm warnings, but reception was spotty in the mountains. I figured I could outrun it, or find a safe place to wait it out. By 7, I knew I'd made a mistake. The wind picked up dramatically, rocking my 18-wheeler like it was made of cardboard. Rain came down in sheets so thick I could barely see 20 feet ahead. My wipers were going full blast, but might as well have been toothpicks against that deluge. Lightning strikes hit close enough that I could feel the thunder vibrating through the steering wheel. After a particularly close strike lit up the whole mountainside, I decided it wasn't worth the risk. There was a wide shoulder coming up, one I'd used before during bad weather. I carefully pulled over, putting on my hazards even though there wasn't another vehicle in sight. The rain hammered against the cab roof like thousands of tiny fists. I turned the engine to idle and took a deep breath. The storm was intense, but I'd seen worse. I figured I'd wait 30 minutes, maybe grab a quick nap if it didn't let up. I remember checking my watch, 7:23, and reaching for my phone to text Carol that I'd be late. That's when I saw movement from the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was just branches swaying in the wind. The tree line was maybe 50 feet from where I'd parked, dense pine forest that ran up the mountainside. But there was something different about this movement, more deliberate, heavier. My first thought was bear. We get plenty of grizzlies in these mountains, and they sometimes come down during storms looking for shelter. I've seen them from my cab before, magnificent animals, but you keep your distance. I reached over and flipped on my high beams to get a better look, thinking I'd snap a quick picture for Carol. She loves wildlife. The beams cut through the rain and illuminated the edge of the forest. What I saw there wasn't a bear. Even now, months later, I struggle to describe it accurately. It was tall. Jesus, it was tall, standing at least 7 feet, maybe taller. It was covered in dark brown fur, matted down from the rain. The build was massive, with shoulders twice as wide as mine, and I'm not a small man. But it wasn't the size that froze me in place. It was the eyes. Deep black eyes, set in a face that was neither human nor animal. They locked onto mine through the windshield, and in that moment, I swear to God, something passed between us. Not communication exactly, but recognition, intelligence, awareness. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My hand hovered over my phone, forgotten. The creature and I stared at each other as lightning flashed overhead, illuminating its massive silhouette against the trees. It didn't make any threatening moves. It just watched me. Then, between one lightning flash and the next, it was gone. Just vanished back into the forest. No crashing through underbrush, no sound I could hear over the storm. Just there 1 second, gone the next. I sat there paralyzed, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Minutes passed, I don't know how many. The rain continued to pound, but I barely noticed it. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. A bear, standing on its hind legs. No, the proportions were all wrong. A man in a costume, in the middle of nowhere during a storm. That made even less sense. Eventually, the rational part of my brain kicked in. I decided I was overtired, that the storm and poor visibility had played tricks on my eyes. I took a few deep breaths and tried to calm down. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists. I don't know how long I sat there. The storm gradually began to ease, the rain transitioning from torrential to merely heavy. I was about to start the engine when blue lights flashed in my mirrors. A Montana State Patrol SUV had pulled up behind me. Under normal circumstances, I might have been annoyed at the inevitable delay. But right then, I was pathetically grateful for human contact. The officer approached with a flashlight, and I rolled down my window. "Everything all right here, sir?" he asked, water dripping from his hat. "Johnson," his nameplate read. "Yes, officer," I managed, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "Just waiting out the storm." He nodded, seeming to accept this. "License and registration, please. Just routine." I handed them over, hoping he wouldn't notice my hands still trembling. He examined them briefly, then handed them back. "Smart move pulling over," he said. "This one's been nasty. Spawned a tornado down in the valley about an hour ago. You heading to Billings?" "Yes, sir," I replied. "Furniture delivery." "Well, the worst has passed now. Road ahead is clear as far as I know." He paused, shining his flashlight around the cab interior. "You sure you're okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost told him then. The words were right there, ready to spill out. But 27 years on the road teaches you which stories to share and which ones to keep to yourself. Who'd believe me? I'd sound like a lunatic. "Just tired," I said. "Long day." He nodded again. "Well, drive safe. Storm's supposed to clear out completely within the hour." I thanked him, and he returned to his vehicle. As his taillights disappeared around the bend, I felt strangely abandoned. I sat there for another 15 minutes until the rain lightened enough that I felt comfortable driving. The whole time, I kept my eyes fixed on the tree line, half expecting the creature to reappear. It didn't. I completed my delivery in Billings the next morning, going through the motions like a robot. I hadn't slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those black eyes staring back at me. I called Carol and told her I was fine, that the delivery went well, that nothing unusual had happened. The first lie I'd ever told her in 22 years of marriage. After the delivery, I stopped at the Flying J truck stop for breakfast. I wasn't hungry, but I needed coffee and normality. The diner section was busy with the usual morning crowd. Truckers, tourists, locals. I took a booth in the corner, ordered coffee and eggs I knew I wouldn't eat, and tried to make sense of the previous night. That's when I overheard them, 2 truckers in the booth behind me, speaking in low, serious voices. I wouldn't have paid attention, except for one word that cut through all the diner noise like a knife. "Bigfoot!" "I'm telling you, Mike, it was right there in the middle of the damn road," one was saying. "Tallest thing I've ever seen on 2 legs. The storm was going crazy, but my headlights caught it clear as day." "Bull," the other replied, but without conviction. No bull. It stood there for maybe 3 seconds, then pounded its chest and let out this scream. Jesus, that scream, like nothing I've ever heard before. Then it just bolted into the trees. This was up on Route 90, just past the Henderson Pass exit. Henderson Pass, that was maybe 5 miles from where I'd pulled over. "When was this?" Mike asked. "Last night, around 7. Height of that storm. I nearly spilled my coffee. 7 o'clock, the same time I was pulling over." The first trucker continued. "I radioed it in to dispatch as a bear sighting. What else could I say? That I saw a Sasquatch. They'd revoke my CDL for mental evaluation." They laughed, but it was uncomfortable laughter, the kind that masks genuine fear. I wanted to turn around, to tell them I'd seen it too, that they weren't crazy, that I'd looked into its eyes, but I couldn't make myself do it. Instead, I paid for my untouched breakfast and left as quickly as I could, without drawing attention. Back in my truck, I pulled up the map on my GPS. There was an alternate route home, longer by about 3 hours, but it avoided that section of mountain completely. I plugged it in without hesitation. Then I called Carol, told her I was coming home early, that I was thinking about that early retirement we'd discussed. She was surprised. We'd planned for me to work another 3 years at least, but happy. She didn't ask questions. That's Carol. She knows when something's wrong, and she knows when to wait for me to be ready to talk about it. It's been 4 months now. I gave my notice to the company a week after that trip. They were surprised. My record was spotless, and good drivers are hard to find. I made up something about my back bothering me. We moved from our place in Idaho to a suburb outside of Phoenix. No mountains, no forests, just desert and city as far as you can see. I still haven't told Carol the real reason. How do you tell someone you love that your entire worldview changed in one moment? That there are things in this world that shouldn't exist but do, that you can't drive through mountains anymore because you're afraid of seeing those eyes again? Sometimes I think about reporting it. There are organizations that investigate this kind of thing. But then what? Best case, they think I'm a reliable witness and add my sighting to their database. Worst case, my name gets out there as that crazy Bigfoot trucker, and I never live it down, so I keep it to myself. I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night sweating, those eyes still vivid in my memory. Not angry eyes, not threatening, just aware, watching, recognizing me as I recognized it, as something that wasn't supposed to exist in the other's world. I don't know what I saw that night in the storm. I don't want to know. All I know is that I'll never drive through those mountains again. Some mysteries should stay in the dark, behind the tree line, watching from a distance as we pass by, unaware of what's really out there. Story 9. I was 14 when it happened, and it still freaks me out to think about it all these years later. I've never been able to explain it, and I've barely told anyone because I know how crazy it sounds. But it was real. I know what I heard, and I know what I saw. It was winter break during my freshman year of high school, around 2005. My parents were going through some rough stuff, fighting all the time. So my mom arranged for me to stay with my Aunt Lisa in Avery, California, this tiny mountain town in the Sierra Nevada. I'd visited before in summer, but never in winter when the whole place was covered in snow. My aunt was living with her boyfriend Rick, who was this outdoorsy type guy with a big beard who worked as a contractor. He was actually in the process of building this small cabin across from the main house where they lived. There was this cold creek running between the properties with this rickety wooden footbridge connecting them. The cabin was barely livable, honestly. It had walls and a roof, but the windows didn't have actual glass yet, just plastic sheeting stapled over the frames to keep the snow and wind out. There was one bedroom upstairs, and the downstairs was basically just one big room with a kitchenette in the corner. The whole place was heated by this old pipe stove in the main room that Rick would load up with wood before bed. I slept on this old couch downstairs in my sleeping bag, right by the stove, so I wouldn't freeze during the night. My aunt and Rick took the bedroom upstairs. They had 2 dogs, a German Shepherd mix named Duke and this smaller mutt called Sadie. These dogs barked at everything squirrels, cars passing by on the distant road, even just random noises in the woods. They were good company though, and usually slept near me at night, so anyway, it was the 3rd night of my stay. We'd had this huge snowstorm come in earlier that day, and everything was completely white outside. The snow was still coming down pretty heavy when we all went to bed around 10. Rick had loaded up the stove, and I was actually pretty cozy in my sleeping bag, despite the occasional draft coming through the plastic window coverings. The dogs were curled up near the stove, and my aunt and Rick had gone upstairs. I must have fallen asleep for a few hours before something woke me up. It was probably around 2 in the morning, and at first I thought it was just the wind. But then I realized the dogs were awake too. They weren't barking though. Duke was standing completely still, staring at the front door with his ears perked up. Sadie was kind of cowering behind him, making this weird whining sound I'd never heard her make before. That's when I heard it. Footsteps in the snow outside, slow, deliberate crunching sounds circling the cabin. These weren't like deer steps or something small. They were heavy, like really heavy. Each step made this deep crunch that you could feel more than hear. The sound moved slowly around the cabin, stopping occasionally before continuing. The dog's behavior freaked me out more than the footsteps. These dogs that would bark their heads off at a leaf blowing across the yard were dead silent, just growling deep in their throats. Duke's hackles were raised, and Sadie had backed herself into a corner, showing her teeth toward the door. I just laid there frozen in my sleeping bag, not knowing what to do. Should I call for my aunt and Rick? Should I turn on a light? I was terrified of drawing attention to myself, so I just stayed completely still, barely breathing. The footsteps made a complete circle around the cabin, and then they stopped right outside the front door. Then I heard this breathing, deep, slow breathing, like something was sniffing at the seam of the door. The pipe stove was still giving off some heat, but I felt ice cold. The breathing continued for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds or so. Then it made this sound, not a growl exactly, more like this low rumbling that started deep and got louder before trailing off. It wasn't like any animal sound I'd ever heard before, Not a bear or a mountain lion or anything I could identify. It was almost vocalization, but not quite speech. I can't really describe it other than saying it made the hair on my arms stand up. After that, the footsteps started again, moving away from the door. Heavy crunches in the snow, heading toward the creek. I strained to listen as they faded, trying to hear if whatever it was crossed the footbridge, but the sound of the wind and the creek made it impossible to tell. I didn't sleep another minute that night. I just laid there with my eyes wide open, watching the dogs gradually calm down, but still remain alert. Duke kept pacing between the door and the window, while Sadie eventually curled up right against my sleeping bag, which she had never done before. As soon as I saw the first hint of light through the plastic window coverings, I got up. The dogs immediately went to the door, wanting out, but I was nervous about letting them go. I put on my boots, coat and gloves, and finally opened the door. The snow had stopped sometime during the night, and everything was pristine white. The sun wasn't fully up yet, but there was enough light to see, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Tracks, huge tracks in the fresh snow, circling the cabin exactly where I'd heard the footsteps. But these weren't animal tracks, or even human tracks. They were something in between. They were unmistakably foot-shaped, with 5 clear toes and a wide heel, but massive. Each print had to be 16 or 17 inches long, and they sank deep into the snow, like 4 or 5 inches deep in spots, where the snow was hard-packed enough that my own boots barely made an impression. The stride between them was insane, too. I tried to step from one print to the next and couldn't come close. They were spaced like 6 or 7 feet apart. The trail showed that whatever made them had walked completely around the cabin, just like I'd heard, then stopped at the door before heading toward the creek. I followed the tracks, with the dogs running ahead of me. They led straight to the barbed wire fence that marked the property line. The thing had just stepped right over it. The prints continued on the other side, without any sign of it climbing through or disturbing the wire. The tracks continued to the footbridge, crossed it, and then I could see them going up the slope on the other side toward the denser forest. I ran back to the cabin and upstairs to get my aunt and Rick. I was talking a mile a minute, trying to explain what had happened during the night and the tracks outside. Rick looked annoyed at being woken up, but my aunt must have seen how freaked out I was because she got up and came downstairs with me. By the time we got outside again, it had started snowing lightly. I showed them the tracks near the cabin, which were still clearly visible. Rick just shrugged and said it was probably an elk or maybe a bear walking on its hind legs for a bit. I tried to explain that these were clearly footprints with toes, not hooves or paws, but he didn't seem interested in investigating further. My aunt looked uncomfortable and kept glancing at the woods beyond the creek. "Best not to think too much about it," she said, leading me back inside. "Animals do strange things in winter when food is scarce." But those weren't animal tracks. I know what I saw. By noon, fresh snow had covered most of the evidence, and by the next day, you couldn't see any sign that something had circled the cabin that night. The rest of my stay, I slept with one eye open. Rick moved a kitchen chair so I could prop it under the doorknob at night, which was his only acknowledgement that maybe I wasn't just imagining things. The dogs stayed close to me every night after that, but whatever had been there that night didn't come back while I was there. Before I left to go back home, I got curious and asked some locals at the general store if they'd ever heard of anything strange in the woods around Avery. The older guy behind the counter exchanged this look with another man sitting in a chair by the wood stove. "You heard something at night, did you?" the counter guy asked me. I nodded, not wanting to sound crazy by mentioning the tracks. "Happens every few winters," the other man said. "Some folks hear wailing sounds up on the ridge road, so loud and strange that drivers pull over thinking they're hearing sirens." "What do you think it is?" I asked. The counter guy just shrugged. "Mountains keep their secrets, but I wouldn't go hiking alone if I were you." I never did tell my parents about what happened. What would I even say? But I know what I heard that night. circling the cabin where I slept. I know what I saw in those tracks. The clear impression of 5 toes, the massive stride, the way it stepped clean over a barbed wire fence without breaking stride. I'm 32 now, and I've never been back to Avery. My aunt and Rick broke up years ago, and he sold that property. But sometimes when I'm camping and hear something moving outside my tent at night, I remember those slow, deliberate footsteps in the snow, and that deep, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl and wasn't quite speech. I'm certain that a Bigfoot walked past my head that winter night in Avery, and I still wonder what would have happened if that flimsy door with its cheap lock had been opened. Story 10. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. My husband Michael thinks I should just let it go, but I can't stop thinking about what happened. I need to tell someone who might understand or have experienced something similar. Last October, Michael and I decided to celebrate our 5th anniversary somewhere special. We're both outdoorsy people, but wanted something more intimate than camping in a tent. We found this little cabin rental near a trailhead in the Rainforest in Washington. It looked perfect, secluded enough to feel like we were alone in nature, but with actual walls and a bathroom. Just basic amenities, nothing fancy. The drive there was gorgeous. If you've never been to the Olympic Peninsula, it's like entering another world. The trees are massive, draped in moss, and everything is this vibrant green that doesn't seem real. We arrived around 3 in the afternoon on a Friday. The cabin was exactly what we expected, small but cozy, with a main room that had a kitchenette, a little table, a couch, and a wood stove. There was a separate bedroom and a tiny bathroom. The porch wrapped around 2 sides with a couple of chairs where we could sit and listen to the forest. That first evening was perfect. We unpacked, went for a short walk on the nearby trail, then made dinner and opened a bottle of wine. We sat on the porch, watching the sunset through the trees until it got too chilly, then moved inside. The forest sounds were so peaceful, just the wind in the trees and distant bird calls. It was everything we wanted. Around 11 that night, I heard something outside. It sounded like rustling near our trash bin, which we'd secured on the side of the porch. I figured it was probably a raccoon and didn't think much of it. Michael was already half asleep, so I didn't even mention it. The next morning, we found the trash bin pushed over. The lid was still on, thankfully, but there were these weird scratch marks along the sides. They didn't look like normal raccoon scratches. They were too big, too deep. Michael said maybe it was a bear, which made me nervous, but he reminded me that black bears aren't usually aggressive. We picked everything up and made sure to move the bin closer to the door. We spent Saturday hiking. The weather forecast had mentioned rain coming in the evening, so we wanted to make the most of the dry day. The Rainforest trails are unbelievable. It's like walking through a fairy tale. Everything is covered in moss, the ferns are huge, and the trees make you feel tiny. We hiked for about 6 hours, taking tons of pictures and just enjoying being away from everything. We made it back to the cabin around 4 in the afternoon, just as the rain started. It wasn't a gentle rain either. It was coming down hard. We were glad to be inside. We showered, made dinner, and settled in for a cozy evening. The sound of the rain on the roof was so soothing that we both dozed off on the couch while reading. That's when things changed. I'm not sure exactly what time it was when we first woke up, probably shortly after midnight. I remember checking my phone at some point and seeing 12:23. We were startled awake by this massive thud against the cabin wall. It was loud enough that the whole cabin seemed to shake. Michael jumped up immediately. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, it happened again. Thud on a different wall. It wasn't like a branch falling. It was deliberate, like something was hitting the cabin. We froze, listening. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, so we could hear other sounds now. Something was moving around outside, not small animal movements, heavy footsteps circling the cabin, slow, deliberate steps. Michael crept to the window and peeked through the curtain. I saw his face go completely white. "What is it?" I whispered. He motioned for me to be quiet and mouthed, "Something big." The footsteps continued around the perimeter of the cabin. Thud. Another impact on the wall nearest the bedroom. It wasn't random. It felt like whatever was out there was testing the structure, looking for a way in. I was shaking uncontrollably by this point. Michael came back to me and put his arm around me. We sat in the middle of the room, away from the windows, just listening. The footsteps continued until they reached the front of the cabin. Then they stopped. The silence was worse somehow. We heard the porch boards creaking, not the normal settling sounds of wood, but the distinct groans of weight being placed on them. Something heavy was on our porch. Michael squeezed my hand so tight it hurt, but I didn't care. I was terrified to make any sound. The creaking moved slowly across the porch, each board protesting under what must have been enormous weight. Then came the breathing, deep, raspy breathing right outside our door. I've never heard anything like it, not like any animal I know. It was substantial, like you could feel the power behind each breath, and it smelled. Even through the closed door, this awful stench started seeping in, like wet dog fur mixed with rotting vegetation and something musky and wild. The door handle rattled, not like someone trying to turn it, but like something was tapping on it, testing it. Tap, tap, tap. Firm, deliberate. I thought I was going to pass out. Michael and I were both frozen, barely breathing. This went on for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. Then the creaking moved away from the door, back across the porch. I heard what sounded like sniffing, long, deep inhalations near the window where our backpacks were sitting inside. Michael got up again, moving silently to peek through the curtain. I wanted to pull him back, but I was too scared to move. He stood there for several seconds, then backed away slowly, his eyes wider than I've ever seen them. "It's huge," he mouthed to me. The creaking continued as whatever it was moved off the porch. Michael crept back to the window. I joined him this time, my curiosity somehow overcoming my fear. Through a gap in the curtains, I caught a glimpse of something. In the dim moonlight filtering through the clouds, I could make out a silhouette moving between the ferns, about 15 feet from the cabin. It was massive, taller than our doorway by at least a foot. The shoulders were incredibly wide, and what looked like matted fur hung in wet clumps from its body. Its arms seemed too long, hanging down near its knees. It moved with this odd, fluid grace despite its size. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't move like that. It wasn't a person either. No human is built like that. It disappeared into the trees, but we could still hear it moving around the perimeter of the clearing. Occasionally, there would be another thud against a different part of the cabin. This continued for hours. We didn't sleep. We just sat in the middle of the room, listening, jumping at every sound. Around 5 in the morning, as the first hint of dawn appeared, the sounds finally stopped. We waited another hour before we dared to move around the cabin. Neither of us wanted to go outside, but when the sun was fully up, Michael finally opened the door. The porch was covered in muddy marks, not footprints exactly, but smears and scrapes that didn't look like any animal tracks I've ever seen. Near one window, we found small branches stacked in a pile, not randomly fallen, deliberately placed there, and they weren't from any of the trees immediately around the cabin. We packed our stuff in record time, no breakfast, no coffee, nothing. Just threw everything in the car and got the hell out of there. We ended up staying in a hotel in Forks for the rest of our anniversary trip, but honestly, I just wanted to go home. I've spent months researching what it could have been. The only thing that makes any sense is a Sasquatch or Bigfoot. I know how that sounds. Before this, I would have laughed at anyone who claimed they saw one, but I know what I saw, and more importantly, I know what I felt. The presence of something intelligent and powerful that was investigating us. I don't think it wanted to hurt us. If it did, that flimsy cabin door wouldn't have stopped it. I think it was curious, maybe territorial, letting us know we were in its space. Michael doesn't like talking about it. He says acknowledging what happened makes it too real, but I can't just pretend it didn't happen. I still wake up sometimes, hearing that deep breathing outside our door, smelling that wild scent. We haven't been camping or hiking since then. I'm not sure when or if we'll feel comfortable in the woods again. There's something humbling about realizing you're not at the top of the food chain, that there are things in the wilderness we still don't understand. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I'm not sure I would believe it if someone told me this story. But I know what I experienced. Something was there with us that night. Something that doesn't fit into our understanding of what exists in those forests. And sometimes, when it's raining hard and I'm home alone, I still find myself checking the locks twice and listening for heavy footsteps on the porch. Story 11. I've lived in Churchill, Manitoba for 15 years now. You get used to the isolation, the bitter cold, and even the polar bears after a while, but what I saw last November still keeps me up at night. I should start by saying that I'm not someone who believes in monsters or gets spooked easily. Living in the polar bear capital of the world toughens you up pretty quick. We have protocols for everything here. How to store your garbage, when to carry bear spray, which areas to avoid during migration season. After 15 years, these precautions become second nature. My cabin sits about 3 miles from the main part of town, which is just how I like it. It's a sturdy place I've improved over the years, reinforced windows, extra insulation, a large wood stove that keeps the place toasty even when it hits 40 below. That evening in November, I was running low on firewood for the night, so I headed out to my woodpile around dusk. Winter was setting in early last year. We'd already had a decent snowfall, and the temperature had dropped to about 15 degrees Fahrenheit. The sky was that deep purple blue you only get in the north when the sun is just below the horizon. I remember pulling my parka tighter and thinking I should have grabbed my gloves as I stepped off my back porch. The first thing that struck me was the silence. If you've ever been in the northern wilderness, you know it's never actually quiet. There's always something, wind in the trees, ravens calling, the distant crack of ice. But at that moment, everything went dead silent. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the heavy, oppressive silence that makes the hair on your neck stand up. I paused halfway to my woodpile, suddenly aware that something was wrong. That's when I heard it. A deep, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath my feet. It wasn't a polar bear sound. I've heard plenty of those over the years. This was different, deeper, more guttural, almost like it was coming from something with a much larger chest cavity. Then came the footfalls, heavy thuds in the snow that were too quick, too rhythmic to be a bear. Whatever was making that sound was moving fast, and it was big, really big. I turned toward the tree line about 50 yards from my cabin, squinting into the gathering darkness. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then it burst from between the trees. My first thought was bear, but I dismissed it immediately. This thing was running on 2 legs. It was tall, at least 7 feet, maybe more, and covered in thick, dark brown hair that was matted and tangled in places. Its arms were long and muscular, pumping as it ran with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large. And it was fast, impossibly fast. That's what I can't get out of my head even now. No human could move like that, especially not through snow that came up past my knees. Before I could process what I was seeing, a second shape exploded from the tree line, and this one I recognized immediately. It was one of the largest polar bears I've ever seen, and I've seen plenty. This was a male, easily over 1,000 pounds, and it was in full charge. Its mouth was open, showing teeth that could crush bone, and it moved with that deceptive speed that makes polar bears such efficient predators. The first creature, I still don't know what to call it, was outpacing the bear. It looked over its shoulder as it ran, and that's when I got a clear look at its face. It wasn't like the descriptions of Bigfoot I've heard about, with the gorilla-like features. This had a flatter nose, deep-set eyes, and a pronounced brow ridge. More, I don't know, human-like in a way that made my stomach turn. They were on a trajectory that would take them right past my cabin, about 30 yards from where I stood frozen in place. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. I just watched as this impossible scene played out in front of me. As the creature sprinted past, I swear it glanced at me. Just for a split second, our eyes met, and I felt something I can't describe. A recognition, an intelligence, but also something wild and ancient. The moment broke when the bear charged past. It briefly locked eyes with me too, but unlike the other creature, I could read the bear's intention clearly. Pure predatory focus. It barely registered my presence before continuing its pursuit. Both animals disappeared into the tundra beyond my property, the sound of their passage fading until I was left in that unnatural silence again. I don't know how long I stood there. My hands had gone numb, and my breath made small clouds in front of my face. Finally, I snapped out of it, grabbed an armful of wood without really paying attention to what I was doing, and hurried back inside. I locked my door, something I rarely do out here, and piled more wood in the stove than I needed. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the lights on and sat by the window, watching the darkness outside, wondering if either creature would return. Every creak of the cabin settling, every gust of wind made me jump. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was just a person in a survival suit, but no human could run that fast, especially not outrunning a polar bear. And that face, that wasn't a mask or a hood. When morning finally came, I waited until the sun was fully up before venturing outside. The snow told the story, massive tracks leading from the tree line, past my cabin, and off into the tundra. I followed them, carrying my rifle, even though I wasn't sure what good it would do against either creature. The tracks continued for almost a mile before they just stopped. Both sets, the bear prints and the bipedal prints, just ended, with no signs of a struggle, no blood, nothing to indicate what had happened. There was no continuation in any direction, no indication that either creature had turned or changed course. They simply vanished. I stood there in the vast whiteness, turning in a slow circle, feeling exposed and vulnerable in a way I never had before in all my years in Churchill. The tundra stretched away in all directions, seemingly empty, but suddenly full of possibilities I didn't want to consider. I retreated to my cabin and spent the day going through old books about northern Manitoba, searching online when my satellite internet would cooperate, looking for any mention of a creature like what I'd seen. There were stories from indigenous peoples about beings in the northern forests, but nothing specific to our area that matched what I'd witnessed. I called a friend who works with conservation, asking casually if there had been any unusual bear activity. He mentioned that several bears had been acting strangely, venturing closer to town than normal, but attributed it to the changing ice patterns affecting their hunting. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Who would believe me? Churchill residents pride themselves on their pragmatism and knowledge of the natural world. Claiming I'd seen some unidentified creature being chased by a polar bear would earn me nothing but concerned looks and suggestions to get more sleep or drink less. Over the next few days, I checked the weather reports and ice forecasts obsessively, wondering if there was some environmental factor that could explain what I'd seen. The bears were starting to move out onto the ice as Hudson Bay began to freeze, their annual migration to hunt seals beginning. Soon the town would be quieter, with most of the bears gone until next year. But I couldn't shake the feeling that what I'd seen wasn't connected to normal wildlife patterns or behaviors. That creature hadn't looked like it belonged here, or anywhere on Earth that I knew of. About a week after the incident, we had another heavy snowfall that covered any remaining tracks. Life returned to its normal rhythm, but something had changed for me. I found myself scanning the tree line whenever I was outside, listening for that unnatural silence that had preceded the encounter. I started carrying bear spray, even for the short walk to my woodpile. I've been in Churchill long enough to know all the sounds of this place, what's normal and what means danger. But now there's a new category in my mind, the unknown. Because if that creature could exist without being documented or widely seen, what else might be out there in the vast wilderness that surrounds us? It's been 3 months now. The days are getting longer again, and soon spring will arrive, bringing the polar bears back to shore as the ice melts. I've almost convinced myself that what I saw was some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Almost, but not quite. Because sometimes, when the wind dies down and the night is especially dark, I think I hear something moving outside my cabin. Something big, on 2 legs, moving with that impossible speed through the snow. And I lie awake, wondering if it's coming back, or if the polar bear finally caught it, or if there are more of them out there in the tundra. I've lived in the north long enough to respect its dangers and its mysteries. But now I find myself questioning everything I thought I knew about this place I call home. What else might be sharing this frozen landscape with us? What other eyes might be watching from the tree line as we go about our lives thinking we're alone? I don't have answers, just the memory of that creature's eyes meeting mine for that brief moment, and the unsettling feeling that it knew exactly what I was, while I still have no idea what it could be. Story 12. I've been wanting to talk about this for ages, but I never really knew how or where to start. It's been 18 years, and I'm 32 now, but what happened that night in 2005 still gives me nightmares. I've tried therapy, meditation, even those stupid essential oils my aunt keeps sending me. Nothing helps. I figure maybe writing it all down might do something, so here goes. I grew up in this tiny house just outside Eureka, California, with my mom and little sister Katie. We weren't rich by any means. Mom worked 2 jobs after Dad left. But we had this cute little house that backed right up to these amazing redwood forests. Like, literally our backyard ended, and then there were these massive trees and ferns everywhere. As a kid, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. We had our own private forest to play in. That summer, July 2005, was brutally hot. I was 14, and my friends Amber and Jesse were staying over. Mom had finally said yes after I'd been begging for weeks. We'd spent the whole day running around outside, picking blackberries from the bushes that grew all along the edge of our property where it met the woods. By evening, our fingers were stained purple, and we had these huge bowls of berries that Mom helped us turn into the world's messiest cobbler. Our house didn't have air conditioning. Most homes up in Humboldt County don't, so Mom let us keep my bedroom window open that night to catch the breeze. My room was on the first floor, at the back of the house, facing those woods. The window was maybe 5 feet off the ground, with these big blackberry bushes growing right underneath it. There was a screen in the window, of course, to keep bugs out. After staying up watching terrible horror movies on our tiny TV, ironic, right? We finally went to my room around 11. It was still so hot that we laid sideways across my bed with our heads toward the open window, talking about stupid stuff, which boys at school we thought were cute. What we wanted to do when school started back up, normal 14-year-old girl things. It must have been around midnight when I first heard it. The night had that sticky, quiet feeling, where you can hear every little sound. We were all getting sleepy, our conversations slowing down, when I heard these footsteps. Heavy ones, crunching through the dry leaves near the bushes below my window. At first I thought it was a deer. We got them all the time, coming out of the woods to eat Mom's garden. But these steps were too heavy, too deliberate. They weren't the light, cautious steps of a deer. They were slow, methodical, like someone or something was walking very carefully. "Did you guys hear that?" I whispered. Amber and Jesse both nodded, their eyes wide in the moonlight filtering through my window. We all went completely still, barely breathing. The footsteps got closer to the house, right beneath my window. Then came the sound of branches breaking, twigs snapping. The blackberry bushes started shaking, their thorny branches scraping against the side of the house. And then God, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. This massive shape rose up behind the branches. It just kept rising, taller and taller, until it blocked out the moonlight completely. Whatever this thing was, it was huge. Much bigger than any person I'd ever seen. Its head and shoulders were covered in this long, matted hair. Not fur exactly, but not like human hair either. Something in between. In the dim light, it looked dark brown or black, but it's hard to be sure. The hair hung down past its shoulders in these tangled clumps, but its face, that's what I remember most clearly. It pushed right up close to my window screen, so close I could see every detail. It had these dark, deeply sunken eyes under a heavy brow ridge, like someone had pushed the eyes back into its skull. The nose was flat and wide, with huge nostrils that flared as it breathed. Parts of its face had patches of bare skin, especially around the cheeks, darker than the rest. And the smell, Jesus Christ, the smell, it hit us like a wall, this overwhelming stench of wet fur and dirt and rotting leaves and something else, something musky and animal that I can't even describe. It was so strong it made my eyes water, even through the screen. Amber started making this high-pitched whimpering sound, and Jessie was scrambling backward across my bed, pressing herself against the far wall. But I couldn't move. I was completely frozen, staring right into those eyes. They weren't animal eyes, not exactly. There was something in them, something that was looking back at me, studying me. The creature leaned even closer, and the screen bowed inward slightly from the pressure. That's when I saw its teeth. Flat and stained yellowish brown, like it had been chewing on tree bark. Not sharp predator teeth, but not human teeth either. It made this sound then, this low, rumbling grumble that wasn't quite a growl. It was deeper than any sound I'd ever heard an animal make, vibrating through the screen and into my bones. It wasn't aggressive exactly, more like curious, investigating. I don't know how to explain it. That's when I finally found my voice and screamed. I screamed louder than I ever have in my life. Mom came running in seconds later, flipping on the hallway light. The sudden brightness flooded my room, and the creature flinched back from the window. I caught one last glimpse of those eyes, reflecting the light in a way that human eyes don't, before it disappeared back into the bushes with this incredible speed for something so large. "What's wrong? What happened?" Mom was asking, but none of us could form complete sentences. We were all talking over each other, pointing at the window, crying. There was something. It was looking at us. It was huge. It was right there. Mom went to the window and looked out. But of course by then there was nothing to see, just the blackberry bushes shaking slightly, as if something had just pushed through them. She called the sheriff's department, and 2 deputies came out about 30 minutes later. They walked around outside with flashlights, checked the perimeter of the house, looked at the bushes. They found some broken branches and what might have been large footprints in the softer soil near the forest edge, but they weren't clear enough to make casts or anything. One of the deputies, this older guy with a grey mustache, got really quiet when Mom described what we'd seen. He didn't laugh or dismiss it like his younger partner did. He just nodded and wrote everything down, then asked if we'd had any other strange experiences living next to the woods. When Mom said no, he gave her his direct number and told her to call if anything else happened. The whole time they were there, I kept hearing noises from the forest, branches breaking, leaves rustling. Not close, but not far either. Like something was watching us from just beyond the tree line, keeping its distance but not leaving. None of us slept that night. We moved to the living room, turned on all the lights, and sat together on the couch until morning. Amber's parents came to get her and Jessie first thing, and they never stayed over again. Can't blame them. The next day, I forced myself to go look at the bushes under my window. They were smashed flat in one spot, like something very heavy had stood there. Several branches were broken, not just bent, but snapped clean off, and on the window screen, there were these smudgy marks that looked like something had pressed against it. Mom cleaned them off before I could really examine them. For weeks afterward, I checked the locks on all our windows twice before bed. I refused to open my window even on the hottest nights. Mom tried to convince me it was probably just a bear. Black bears are common in the forests around Eureka, but I know what I saw. Bears don't stand 8 feet tall. Bears don't have those eyes. Bears don't look at you like they're trying to understand who you are. About a month later, I overheard Mom talking to her friend on the phone. There had been other reports that summer. Hikers in the redwoods finding strange footprints, campers hearing weird sounds at night. One family even claiming something huge had walked through their campsite while they slept, taking nothing but leaving massive footprints behind. We moved away from that house the following year. Mom said it was because she got a better job in Sacramento, but I always wondered if it was because of what happened, because of the way I jumped at every sound from the forest after that night, because of how none of my friends would come over anymore. I'm 32 now, with my own place in Portland. I still can't sleep with my windows open, not even on the 7th floor of my apartment building. I still wake up sometimes thinking I smell that distinctive odor, that mixture of wet fur and earth and something ancient. I've tried telling this story to a few people over the years. Most laugh it off. Just some kids scaring themselves, they say. A bear or a homeless person, they suggest. My ex-boyfriend once drunkenly told our friends that I'd seen Bigfoot as a kid, and they all had a great laugh at my expense. But I know what I saw that night. It wasn't human. It wasn't a normal animal either. Whatever it was intelligent enough to be curious about us, deliberate enough to approach the house quietly, aware enough to flee when the lights came on. Sometimes I think about those eyes looking back at me, and I wonder if it's still out there in those redwood forests, watching other houses, looking through other windows. And sometimes, on very quiet nights, I swear I can hear heavy footsteps outside, even though there's nothing but concrete for miles around my building. I don't know what to call what I saw. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever. All I know is that it was real. It was there. And not a single night has gone by in 18 years that I don't think about it before I fall asleep. Story 13. I still can't believe what I saw that day. It's been 2 weeks now, and I keep replaying it in my head over and over. I'm not some guy who goes looking for weird stuff or believes every conspiracy theory out there. I'm just a regular dude who works construction and minds my own business. But what happened that afternoon in Altoona has me questioning everything I thought I knew. It was early November, unseasonably warm. I'd gone over to Karen's place, that's my ex-wife, to fix her garbage disposal. We've been divorced for 3 years now, but we're civil. I still help her out with house stuff since she's raising our daughter Lily there. The house is this older duplex on the edge of town, backing up to woods that eventually connect to Brush Mountain. I'd finished up around 4:30 in the afternoon. The sun was already getting low. You know how it gets dark early in November. I was loading my tools back into my truck, parked in her driveway. Nothing unusual, just the normal sounds of the neighborhood. Distant leaf blowers, someone's dog barking a few houses down. I remember I'd just put my drill case in the truck bed when something made me glance toward Karen's detached garage. At first, I didn't process what I was seeing. Between Karen's garage and the neighbor's duplex, there's maybe a 15-foot gap. And walking, no, striding, through that gap was something big. My brain tried to make sense of it. A person in a costume, a really tall guy, but within seconds, I knew this wasn't human. Whatever it was stood well over 7 feet tall. Its shoulders were impossibly wide, like a linebacker on steroids. But what hit me hardest was the way it moved. Smooth, purposeful, like it knew exactly where it was going. It was covered head to toe in dark hair, not like a costume, but actual hair, dark brown or maybe black in the fading light. The hair wasn't super long, but thick, covering everything. Its arms hung lower than a human's should, swinging slightly as it walked. The legs were thick, powerful looking, and it was walking completely upright, just like a person would, but with this, I don't know, this confidence that made my skin crawl. The whole sighting couldn't have lasted more than 3 or 4 seconds. It crossed that gap between buildings in just a couple of strides and disappeared behind the garage, heading toward the woods that back up to the property. I stood there, frozen, tools forgotten, trying to process what I'd just seen. I'm not ashamed to admit my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't hear any branches breaking or footsteps. Whatever this thing was, it moved quietly despite its size. After a minute of just standing there like an idiot, I closed my truck and went back inside Karen's house. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost because she immediately asked what was wrong. "I just saw something behind the garage," I said, my voice sounding strange even to me. "Something big, walking on 2 legs, covered in hair." I expected her to laugh at me or at least look confused. Instead, she just sighed and said, "You saw it too, huh?" That stopped me cold. "What do you mean, too?" Karen sat down at the kitchen table and motioned for me to join her. "Lily saw it about a month ago, walking that same path behind the garage. My sister saw it last summer when she was staying here. We don't talk about it much because, well, who's going to believe us?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Why didn't you ever mention this to me?" She shrugged. "Would you have believed me if I told you there was some kind of Bigfoot thing walking through the yard occasionally?" She had a point. I wouldn't have. Karen went on to explain that these sightings had been happening periodically for the past 2 years, always the same path, from the wooded area on one side, between the buildings, and back into the deeper woods behind the property. Always in the late afternoon or early evening, always alone, never any evidence left behind. "Has it ever approached the house or tried to get in?" I asked, suddenly worried about Lily. "No," Karen said firmly. "It just passes through. It's like we're on some kind of regular route it takes. Lily's actually seen it 3 times now. The first time she was scared, but now she just calls it the forest man and doesn't seem bothered." I spent another hour at Karen's talking about this thing, comparing notes about what we'd seen. Part of me was relieved I wasn't crazy, but another part was deeply unsettled that this creature was regularly passing so close to where my 13-year-old daughter sleeps. I headed home around 6, still shaken. I live about 20 minutes away, in a more developed part of town with no woods nearby, which suddenly seemed like a very good thing. I tried to distract myself with TV, but I couldn't focus. I kept seeing that thing in my mind, the broad shoulders, the fluid movement, those long arms. At 8:30 that same evening, my phone rang. It was Karen, her voice pitched higher with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," she said without preamble. "The Wallace house down the street is getting a new roof, and the crew was working late today. 2 of the roofers just came pounding on my door, asking if I'd seen the monster that just walked behind my garage." My stomach dropped. "What? Just now?" "About 15 minutes ago. They said they were packing up their tools when they both saw this huge, hairy thing walking between the buildings. They thought it was a bear at first, but then realized it was walking on 2 legs. They came to warn me because they thought it might be dangerous." "What did you tell them?" I asked. I thanked them for the warning, but didn't mention anything about our previous sightings. They seemed pretty freaked out. One of them kept crossing himself. The coincidence was too much. 2 completely independent sightings of the same creature, in the same location, on the same day. These roofers had no idea I'd seen anything earlier. They had no connection to Karen or her family. They were just guys doing a job who happened to see something they couldn't explain. "Did they call anyone? The police or animal control?" I asked. "They said they were going to report it, but I don't know if they actually will. Who would believe them?" After I hung up with Karen, I couldn't sit still. I paced around my apartment trying to make sense of what was happening. I've never been interested in Bigfoot or cryptids or any of that stuff. I always figured people who claimed to see those things were either attention seekers or had mistaken a bear for something else. But now I'd seen something with my own eyes that defied explanation. The more I thought about it, the more details came back to me. The way its head sat directly on its shoulders, with almost no visible neck. The slight stoop to its posture, even though it was fully upright. The way its knees seemed to bend differently than a human's when it walked. And most of all, the complete silence. Something that size should have made noise moving through that space, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no branches breaking when it entered the woods. Over the next few days, I did some research online. Turns out Brush Mountain and the surrounding areas in central Pennsylvania have a history of similar sightings going back decades. Not tons of reports, but enough to establish a pattern. Most describe the same thing I saw. Tall, dark-haired, bipedal, moving with purpose through wooded areas. I went back to Karen's house the following weekend, partly to check on her and Lily, partly because I wanted to examine the area in daylight. The gap between the buildings where I'd seen the creature was unremarkable, just grass with some gravel scattered around. The woods beyond the garage were typical Pennsylvania second-growth forest. Lots of oak and maple trees, dense undergrowth, sloping gradually up toward the mountain. I walked about 50 yards into those woods, looking for any sign of a trail or path. I found what might have been a game trail, a narrow path where the undergrowth was slightly trampled, leading deeper into the forest in the direction of Brush Mountain. But it could have been made by deer or other normal wildlife. There was nothing definitive. Lily was home, and when Karen went to the bathroom, I carefully asked my daughter about what she'd seen. She described it matter-of-factly, the way kids often talk about extraordinary things. "It's really tall and covered in fur," she said. "It always walks the same way, behind the garage and into the trees. I saw it from my bedroom window." "Does it scare you?" I asked. She thought about it for a second. "Not really. It never looks at the house. It's just walking somewhere." Her calm acceptance was almost more unsettling than the sighting itself, like this was just a normal part of living in that house. When Karen came back, she told me something she hadn't mentioned before. Her next-door neighbor, the other half of the duplex, had moved out suddenly last year. They'd been there 5 years, but left with barely a word of explanation, breaking their lease. Karen always wondered if they'd seen something that scared them off. "It's been 2 weeks now, and I haven't seen the creature again, though I've been back to Karen's house twice. Part of me hopes I never see it again, but another part feels, I don't know, almost chosen, like I'm one of the few people who know this secret thing exists in the world. I keep asking myself what it could be. A previously undiscovered species? Some kind of evolutionary offshoot from humans? Something else entirely? The rational part of my brain keeps trying to explain it away. A person in a costume, a bear walking strangely, a trick of the light. But I know what I saw. The roofers know what they saw. Karen and Lily and others have seen it too. I haven't told anyone else about this. Who would believe me? I can barely believe it myself, and I'm the one who saw it. But I know it was real. That thing, that creature, whatever you want to call it, is out there in the woods of central Pennsylvania, following its own mysterious path, occasionally passing through human spaces without a second thought. And the thing that keeps me up at night isn't fear that it might come after me or my family. It's the realization that we might be sharing this world with intelligent creatures we know nothing about. Creatures that have managed to stay hidden despite our cities, our technology, our constant expansion into wild spaces. What else might be out there that we don't know about? What else might be watching us from the shadows of the forest? Story 14. I've never shared this with anyone outside my closest circle, but I can't keep it bottled up anymore. What I saw that night defies everything I thought I knew about our world, and it's changed how I look at those woods forever. This happened just last summer, in July of 2023. I'm a police officer in Louisiana, been on the force for about 6 years now. I'm not some rookie who jumps at shadows, and I've spent enough time in the backwoods to know what bears, deer, wild hogs, and other local wildlife look like. What I encountered wasn't any of those. My girlfriend lives in this really isolated area near Sicily Island, about 20 minutes from the nearest town. Her house is surrounded by dense forest, with the Matensis River winding not far off. It's the kind of place where the darkness feels complete at night, where the stars look incredible because there's practically no light pollution. I've always loved the peace out there, but now I'm not so sure. That night, I'd stayed later than planned. We'd grilled out, had a few beers. I was well under the limit before anyone asks, and just enjoyed each other's company on her back deck. The cicadas were going crazy, typical summer night in Louisiana. I finally decided to head out around 3 in the morning. I know it sounds late, but my shift wasn't until the following afternoon, so I wasn't worried about getting home. I kissed her goodbye, hopped in my personal vehicle, a Ford F-150, nothing fancy, and started the drive out. Her place sits at the end of this long, winding gravel road that connects to the main highway. It's about 2 miles of nothing but trees, with a nasty S-curve about halfway through. The road is barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass each other, and during the day, it's beautiful. At night, though, it's a different story. My high beams were cutting through the darkness, dust kicking up behind me. The gravel was popping under my tires, that familiar crunching sound. I had the windows down, warm summer air rushing in, some old country song playing low on the radio. I was just cruising along, maybe doing 25 miles per hour, approaching that S-curve I mentioned. That's when I first saw it. At first I thought maybe a bear had wandered onto the road. There was this large, dark shape crouched low in the middle of the gravel. My headlights caught what looked like 2 yellow-amber eyes reflecting back at me. They were set too wide apart to be a deer or coyote, and too high off the ground. I immediately slowed down, not wanting to hit whatever it was. As I got closer, maybe 50 yards away, the shape moved. It didn't scurry away like a startled animal. It didn't bound off like a deer. Instead, it sort of shifted to the side of the road, and then, and this is what still gives me chills, it stood up. I'm not talking about a bear standing on its hind legs. This thing unfolded itself from a crouching position to standing fully upright like a person would. Except it wasn't a person, not even close. In the full beam of my headlights, I could see it clearly. The thing was covered in thick black hair or fur, with some grey patches mixed in. The hair hung in these long strands, especially on its arms and legs. I'd guess 8 to 10 inches long in some places. Its shoulders were impossibly wide and muscular, like a bodybuilder, but proportionally even bigger. The chest was defined, and I could see pale skin in spots where the hair was thinner. Its arms, Jesus! Its arms hung way past its knees. They were massive, like tree trunks covered in that long, dark hair. I'm 6'1", and this thing towered over what I'd guess my height would be if I was standing there. Had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more, and the mass of it, easily 500 pounds or more of what looked like pure muscle. I had slowed almost to a stop by this point, my truck idling maybe 15 feet from where it stood at the edge of the road. The creature just watched me. That's the only way I can describe it. It didn't show aggression. It didn't charge or make threatening movements. It just stood there, those yellow eyes fixed on my vehicle, watching with what seemed like curiosity or intelligence. My training kicked in, and I found myself making mental notes like I would at a scene. Height, weight, distinguishing features. Part of me was in shock, but the officer part was trying to catalogue what I was seeing. I remember thinking, I'm looking at a Sasquatch, a goddamn Bigfoot. It wasn't a man in a suit. No costume could capture the natural way this thing moved. The muscle definition visible even through the hair. The way its chest expanded as it breathed. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Probably only seconds, but it felt like minutes. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I remember feeling sweat running down my back, despite the AC being on. Finally, I decided to keep driving. Slowly, I pressed the gas, moving forward at maybe 5 miles per hour. The creature never moved as I passed it. I was close enough that if I had rolled down my passenger window and reached out, I might have been able to touch it. The smell hit me as I passed. A strong, musky odor, like wet dog mixed with something earthy and wild. I checked my rearview mirror constantly as I continued down the road. The Sasquatch, I don't know what else to call it, remained at the roadside until I rounded the curve and it disappeared from view. My hands were shaking so badly I had to pull over about a quarter mile later. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, trying to process what I'd seen, wondering if I should go back, if I should call it in. But what would I say? Hey, just saw Bigfoot on Sicily Road. They'd have me drug tested and psych evaluated before morning. And there was no way in hell I was going back there alone, not at that hour. I finally collected myself enough to drive home. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat on my couch with all the lights on, a cup of coffee going cold in my hands, replaying what I'd seen over and over. The next day, I called in and took a personal day. I drove back out there in the daylight. There wasn't much to see, some disturbed gravel at the spot where I remembered the creature standing, but nothing conclusive. No footprints in the hard-packed dirt at the roadside, no hair samples I could find, nothing that would prove what I'd seen. I debated telling my girlfriend, but I didn't want her to be scared living out there alone. I finally told her about a week later, and to her credit, she didn't laugh or suggest I'd been seeing things. She said there have been stories about something in those woods for generations. Locals don't talk about it much to outsiders, but apparently some of the older folks in the area have had similar encounters. Since then, I've done some research. There have been other Bigfoot sightings in Louisiana over the years, quite a few around the Sicily Island area specifically. The terrain there, heavily wooded, plenty of water sources, remote, would make ideal habitat for something that wanted to remain hidden from humans. I drive that road differently now. I'm constantly scanning the tree line, watching for movement, half hoping and half dreading I'll see it again. I keep a high-resolution dash cam running anytime I'm out there. So far, nothing. I haven't filed any official reports. Like I said, as a police officer, credibility is everything, and I'm not ready to put my career on the line. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a person, wasn't any known animal. It was a male Sasquatch, standing bold as brass by the roadside in the middle of the night. The thing that sticks with me most isn't the size or the strange appearance, it's the eyes. There was awareness there, intelligence. It observed me with purpose, with understanding, like it was assessing me the same way I was assessing it. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about those eyes watching me from the darkness. I don't expect everyone to believe this account. Hell, if someone had told me this story a year ago, I'd have been skeptical too. But when you see something like that with your own eyes, something that challenges everything you thought you knew about the natural world, it changes you. I'm more alert now when I'm patrolling rural areas for work. I find myself looking deeper into the shadows, listening more carefully to sounds in the woods. There are things out there we don't understand, things science hasn't catalogued or explained. I know because I saw one, plain as day, in my headlights on a gravel road in the Louisiana backwoods. That creature, that Sasquatch, was real, and it's still out there somewhere in those woods watching and waiting. I just hope next time, if there is a next time, I have my camera ready. DC, Story 15. Osim, I still can't believe what happened last September, and I haven't told many people because I know how it sounds. I've lived in rural Indiana my whole life, about 15 minutes outside Luguti, so I know what's normal and what isn't in these parts. I've seen plenty of deer, coyotes, even the occasional black bear passing through. But what I saw that night wasn't anything I could identify. It was September 14th, around 10:30 at night. I remember the date because it was my mom's birthday, and I'd spent the evening on the phone with her. My property sits on about 3 acres, with woods along the back and sides, and my neighbor's soybean field stretching out to the east. I've always loved living out here, the quiet, the stars, the privacy. At least I did until that night. My dogs, I have 3 of them, Two labs and a German Shepherd mix were getting antsy after being inside all evening while I talked to my mum. So I grabbed my big Maglite spotlight and opened the back door to let them out for their final bathroom break before bed. It was a clear night, warm for September, with a 3/4 moon casting decent light across the yard. But the edge of the property where it meets the soybean field was still pretty dark. I've always been in the habit of scanning the fields and tree line before letting the dogs roam. We have coyotes around here, and while they usually won't bother with dogs my size, I'm cautious. So I swept the spotlight beam along the edge of the field, following my usual pattern, and that's when I saw them. Two sets of eyes glowing in the spotlight beam, about 7 feet off the ground. They were about 300 feet away at the far edge of the soybean field, where it meets another patch of woods. At first I thought it might be reflections of something in the field, or maybe some weird light trick, but then they moved. I froze, the spotlight still trained on that spot. The eyes were attached to something tall, definitely upright figures. I couldn't make out clear details at that distance in the dark, but they were standing, not on all fours. I know how tall a person would look at that distance, and these were bigger, much bigger, maybe 7.5 feet tall. The moment they realized I'd spotted them, they moved in unison toward a patch of overgrown brush at the field's edge. It wasn't a sprint, more like a purposeful walk, but they covered ground quick, way quicker than seemed normal. They disappeared behind this huge overgrown bush. Not quite a tree, but a massive wild shrub that's been growing at the field edge for years. My dogs hadn't noticed anything yet. They were sniffing around the yard closer to the house. But I was frozen in place, spotlight still aimed at that bush. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I had this weird feeling like the air had gotten heavier. Then the weirdest thing happened. One of the figures peeked out from behind the bush, just its head, looking directly at me. The eyes caught the spotlight again, and I swear they reflected like animals' eyes do at night, that greenish-yellow glow, but they were too high up to be any normal animal around here. After a few seconds, it ducked back behind the bush. Then the second one did the exact same thing, peeked out, stared right at me, then ducked back. They kept doing this for what felt like forever, but was probably just a few minutes, taking turns, peek out, stare, duck back, like some bizarre game of peekaboo. But there was nothing playful about it. It felt calculated, like they were studying me. What freaked me out the most was how deliberate it all seemed. These weren't animals acting on instinct. This was strategic behavior. They were hiding, watching, taking turns observing, and they were tall. Way too tall for deer, even if deer somehow decided to stand on their hind legs for minutes at a time, which they don't. And coyotes don't grow to 7 feet, obviously. My German Shepherd, Rex, finally noticed something was wrong. He stopped sniffing around and came to stand beside me, hackles raised, staring in the same direction as my spotlight. He didn't bark or growl, he just stood there, tense as a bowstring. That's when I knew for sure I wasn't imagining things. Rex is the calmest of my dogs, and he doesn't react to normal wildlife. I called all 3 dogs back to the house, trying to keep my voice steady. They came, even though the labs seemed confused about cutting their outside time short. Once they were all inside, I locked the door and went from window to window, making sure everything was locked up tight. I pulled all the blinds closed, too. For about an hour, I just sat in my living room, lights off, trying to process what I'd seen. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was hunters using some kind of stilts. But who hunts in a soybean field at night? And why would they be playing peekaboo from behind a bush? Nothing made sense. Around midnight, my fear started giving way to curiosity. I know that sounds stupid, but I've always been the type who needs to understand things. I couldn't just go to bed wondering, so I grabbed my spotlight again, plus a baseball bat. Not that it would have done much good against whatever those things were, and went back outside. I left the dogs inside this time. The night had gotten quieter. No crickets, no frogs, just dead silence. That should have been my second warning, but I was too focused on figuring out what I'd seen. I walked about 50 feet into the soybean field, sweeping my spotlight back and forth. The plants came up to about mid-thigh on me, so I could still move fairly easily. I made it about halfway to where I'd seen the eyes, when every instinct in my body screamed at me to stop. Have you ever felt watched, like really watched? Not just someone glancing your way, but the heavy feeling of being studied? That's what hit me. I couldn't see anything, no eyes reflecting in my spotlight, no movement in the brush, but I knew with absolute certainty that whatever I'd seen hadn't gone far. They were still there, watching me from somewhere. The feeling was so intense, I actually spun around, thinking they might be behind me now. Nothing, just soybeans and darkness. But the feeling remained, this overwhelming sense that I was being observed by something intelligent. I backed away slowly, keeping my spotlight moving and the bat ready. I didn't run. Something told me running would be a bad idea. I just maintained a steady backward pace until I reached my yard. Then I walked normally back to the house, trying not to show fear, like I was being judged on how I handled myself. Once inside, I sat up the rest of the night with all the lights on. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even inside my house. I kept looking at the windows, expecting to see those eyes peering in at me, even though my windows are a good 8 feet off the ground. The next morning, I went out to check the field in daylight. I found some odd impressions in the soil where the soybeans had been pushed aside or broken, roughly where I'd seen the figures, but it had been dry and the ground was hard. There weren't clear tracks I could identify, just disruptions in the normal pattern of the plants. It's been over a year now, and I still check that field every single evening before letting my dogs out. I've installed security cameras and motion sensor lights around my property. I haven't seen those tall figures again, but sometimes, especially on clear, quiet nights, I get that same feeling of being watched. I've researched everything I can think of: local wildlife, escaped exotic animals, even people playing pranks. Nothing fits. The strategic behavior, the height, the way they move together, it doesn't match anything I know of. The weirdest part, I've lived here 15 years, and I've never believed in anything supernatural. I'm still not saying that's what I saw, but whatever was watching me from the edge of that soybean field wasn't a normal animal. They were too tall, too smart, and too deliberate. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, just beyond the tree line, waiting for me to let my guard down. And sometimes, when the wind blows through the soybeans at night and makes that soft rustling sound, I swear I can hear something else mixed in with it. Something that sounds almost like whispers. I've thought about moving, but this is my home. Besides, who'd believe this story if I tried to explain why I was selling? So I stay. I keep watch. And I wonder what exactly was watching me that night from the edge of the field, and if they'll ever come back. Story 16. I never thought I'd be one of those people, you know, the ones sharing bizarre experiences that sound completely unbelievable. I've always been the skeptical type, the person who needs evidence, who looks for the logical explanation. But what happened to me last summer has shaken everything I thought I knew about the natural world. It was Thursday, June 18th, 2020. That date is burned into my memory now. I remember it was unusually warm that morning, and I had decided to take a drive out to Uwharrie National Forest in North Carolina. As someone with a biology degree, I often spend my free time hiking, cataloging plant species, and occasionally tracking wildlife. I've been in those woods hundreds of times over the years. I know that area like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did. I left home around 7 in the morning. The roads were practically empty, which wasn't surprising given how remote this area is. I was driving my old Toyota pickup, windows down, enjoying the fresh air and solitude. I remember feeling particularly good that day. The pandemic had kept me cooped up for months, and this was one of my first real outings since restrictions had eased a bit. The road leading to Uwharrie is winding and narrow, with dense forest on both sides. I was about 15 minutes from the main entrance, on a stretch I've driven countless times. The sun was fully up by then, casting dappled shadows through the trees. The road ahead was clear and straight for about a quarter mile. That's when I saw it. About 200 feet ahead of me, something emerged from the tree line on the left side of the road. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was just a dark shape, moving quickly. But as I got closer, still driving about 40 miles per hour, I realized I was looking at something I couldn't explain. This thing was massive. I'm not exaggerating when I say it had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. Its proportions were all wrong for a human. The shoulders were too broad, the arms too long, hanging down past its knees. It was covered in what looked like thick, dark black fur or hair, but its face and hands had this strange ashen or greyish coloration that stood out against the darkness of the rest of its body. What struck me most was how it moved. This wasn't a person in a costume. No way. The fluidity and power in its movement was unlike anything I've ever seen. It crossed the entire width of the road, I'd guess about 20 feet, in just 2 enormous strides. 2. The speed was incredible, almost like watching footage on fast forward. But this was happening right in front of me, in real time, in broad daylight. I instinctively hit the brakes, not hard enough to skid, but enough to slow down considerably. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. The creature never looked at me, never acknowledged my vehicle at all. It just moved with purpose, heading toward the old railroad tracks on the right side of the road. By the time I reached the spot where it had crossed, it was gone, completely vanished into the thick underbrush beyond the tracks. I pulled over immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely put the truck in park. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, just breathing, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. Eventually, I worked up the courage to get out of my truck. The morning was dead quiet, no birds singing, no insects buzzing, just silence. I walked to where I'd seen the creature cross and looked for tracks, broken branches, anything. The ground was hard and dry, and I couldn't find any definitive prints. But there was a disturbance in the vegetation leading toward the tracks, broken twigs and bent grass that seemed to indicate something large had moved through recently. I followed this trail for maybe 30 feet before stopping. The forest felt wrong. I've spent most of my life outdoors, and I've learned to trust that primal instinct that tells you when something isn't right. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to get back in my truck and leave. So I did. I drove straight to the ranger station at Eureka. The ranger on duty was Tom, someone I've known for years. I've helped with several conservation projects in the area, so he knows I'm not someone who makes things up or exaggerates. When I told him what I'd seen, he didn't laugh or dismiss me. He just got very quiet and asked for exact coordinates of where the sighting occurred. "It's not the first report we've had," he finally said, lowering his voice even though no one else was around. "Especially not from that section of the forest, but we don't officially document these things." He wouldn't elaborate further, just advised me to be careful and suggested I might want to choose a different area for my field work that day. I couldn't focus anyway, so I ended up driving home instead. For weeks afterward, I questioned what I'd seen. I researched local wildlife extensively, though I already knew there's nothing native to North Carolina that matches what I saw. A bear walking upright. No way. The proportions were all wrong, and the movement was nothing like a bear's awkward bipedal waddle. A person in a costume, in the middle of nowhere, moving with impossible speed and agility, that makes even less sense. I've analyzed this encounter from every angle. I wasn't tired or impaired. It was broad daylight. I had a clear view. The creature was close enough that I could see details like the color variation in its fur. And I've spent my entire adult life studying biology and observing wildlife. I know how to identify animals, even unusual ones. What I saw that day matches the descriptions of what people call Bigfoot. I never thought I'd say those words seriously. I've always dismissed those stories as misidentifications or hoaxes. But now, I don't know what to think anymore. The thing that haunts me most is how purposeful it seemed. It wasn't wandering aimlessly. It was moving with intention, as if it had somewhere specific to be. That suggests intelligence, routine, maybe even a community. And if there's one, there could be more. I've gone back to that spot several times since then, always in broad daylight, always with my camera ready. I've never seen it again. Part of me is relieved, but another part feels, I don't know, like I've been given a glimpse of something extraordinary, something that challenges everything I thought I knew about the natural world. I've told very few people about this. My girlfriend thinks I saw a bear and that my mind played tricks on me. My brother half believes me, but thinks I'm exaggerating the size and speed. A couple of my colleagues from the university have suggested everything from escaped exotic animals to stress-induced hallucinations. But I know what I saw. It was real, it was there, and it wasn't anything that science currently recognizes. The strangest part is how this experience has changed me. I used to hike alone all the time, venturing deep into remote areas without a second thought. Now I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, listening for unusual sounds, scanning the tree line. It's not exactly fear, it's more like a heightened awareness that the woods might contain things we don't understand. Sometimes at night, I lie awake thinking about it. Was it aware of me? Did it know I saw it? Where was it going in such a hurry? Does it live in those woods I've spent so much time in, watching humans come and go while remaining hidden? I've researched other sightings in the area since then. There aren't many reported officially, but I've found online forums where locals share stories they don't tell publicly for fear of ridicule. Many descriptions match what I saw: the height, the dark fur with lighter face, the incredible speed and fluid movement. Some reports come from the same general area where I had my encounter. One local man, a hunter in his 70s, told me he's seen similar creatures 3 times over his lifetime, always in the deeper parts of Uwari. They don't want trouble, he said. They just want to be left alone. That's why they stay deep in the forest, away from people. You're lucky yours was just crossing the road. They don't always just walk away. That conversation sent chills down my spine. What did he mean by that? He wouldn't elaborate further, just shook his head and changed the subject. I've become somewhat obsessed with understanding what I saw. I've installed trail cameras in that area with proper permits. Spent countless hours researching cryptozoology, something I would have scoffed at before, and even reached out to researchers who study Bigfoot reports scientifically. Most have been supportive and interested in my experience, especially given my background in biology. One researcher pointed out something I hadn't considered: the railroad tracks. Apparently, there's a pattern of sightings near railroad corridors. The theory is that these creatures use the relatively clear pathways alongside tracks to travel through otherwise dense forest. It makes sense from a practical standpoint. Why struggle through thick underbrush when there's an easier path? The tracks near where I had my sighting have been inactive for years, overtaken by vegetation, but still creating a natural corridor. What bothers me most isn't that I saw something unexplainable. It's that if these creatures are real, and I'm now convinced they are, how have they remained undiscovered by science? How many are there? How have they avoided detection, leaving behind so little evidence that most scientists dismiss their existence entirely? I don't have answers. All I have is what I saw with my own eyes on that June morning. A massive, bipedal creature covered in dark fur, moving with impossible speed and grace across a lonely stretch of road in rural North Carolina. Something that shouldn't exist according to conventional zoology, yet something I know was real. I still drive that road, I still work in those woods. But I do it differently now, more aware, more open to possibilities I once dismissed, and always watching the tree line, half hoping, half fearing I'll see it again. Story 17. I never thought I'd be someone who'd experienced something like this. Even typing it out now makes my hands shake. It's been almost 2 years, but I still get cold sweats thinking about what happened that day near the old Mercury mines. So back in September of 2021, my dad and I went hunting outside Morton, Washington, near the old Roy and Barnum McDonald Mercury mines. I was 15 then. Dad had been taking me hunting since I was 12, but this was my first time in this particular area. The place had this eerie feeling to it, maybe because of the abandoned mines, or maybe something else entirely. Looking back, I think it was something else. It was late September, and the weather was starting to get that autumn chill. The leaves were changing, which made for good visibility in some spots, but there were still plenty of thick areas where you couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead. Dad had scouted the area a few weeks before and found a good spot on the edge of what locals call the Mercury Flat, basically a clearing near the old mining operations. The first day, Dad set me up in a tree stand at the edge of this flat while he went about 300 yards west to another promising spot. We had our radios and planned to stay until dusk. I remember being excited because this was the first hunting season where Dad trusted me to be completely on my own. I settled into my stand around 3 in the afternoon. The first couple hours were pretty uneventful, saw a few squirrels, a hawk, nothing special. But around 5:30, something changed. The woods got quiet, and I mean quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Anyone who spends time in the woods knows that's not normal. Then I heard it, movement in the brush about 50 yards to my left. At first I thought, finally, a deer. I slowly grabbed my binoculars, trying not to make any sudden movements. But whatever was moving through the underbrush wasn't moving like a deer. Deer have this distinctive way of walking. They're cautious. They stop and start. This was different. This thing was moving in these weird patterns, like it was darting back and forth. 1 second it would be in one spot, then quickly move 10 yards in another direction, stop, then move again. It was big too, breaking branches that even an elk would have trouble snapping. But it wasn't crashing through like an elk would. It seemed deliberate, careful almost. I couldn't see anything through the thick brush, just hear the movement. My heart was racing and I was starting to get nervous. Then it got weirder. I heard what sounded like knocking, like someone taking a stick and hitting it against a tree. Knock, knock, knock. Then silence. Then another knock from a slightly different location. I remembered reading about hunters, hearing strange knocking in the woods, but I'd always brushed those stories off. Now I was hearing it myself, and I was freaking out. I reached for my radio to call Dad, but before I could press the button, it happened. The scream, Jesus Christ, that scream. It started deep, almost like a growl, then rose into this high-pitched wail that echoed through the entire valley. It was loud, like hurt your ears loud, even from whatever distance away it was. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard, not an elk, not a cougar, nothing from this world. The closest thing I can compare it to is maybe a woman being murdered mixed with a gorilla roar, but even that doesn't do it justice. I dropped my radio. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't even pick it up. After about 30 seconds of absolute terror, I managed to get the radio and call Dad. I was whispering, afraid whatever made that sound would hear me. Dad, there's something out here, it screamed. I've never heard anything like it. Dad, trying to keep me calm. Probably just a cougar. They can make weird sounds. No, Dad, this wasn't a cougar. It was knocking on trees before it screamed. There was a pause on the radio. Stay put. I'm coming to you. Don't move. The 15 minutes it took Dad to reach my stand were the longest of my life. The woods stayed dead quiet, but I felt like something was watching me. When Dad finally arrived, whatever it was had moved on, or at least wasn't making noise anymore. We got out of there quick, and on the drive home, Dad tried to rationalize what I'd heard. Maybe it was multiple animals, maybe it was some weird echo effect, but I could tell he was spooked too. The really messed up part? We went back a week later. Dad had convinced himself it was probably just a weird natural occurrence, and I'd let myself believe him because the alternative was too scary to think about. This time, we arrived earlier in the day, around noon. Dad thought being there in full daylight would help ease my nerves. We went back to the same spots, me in my stand at the edge of the Mercury flat, him a few hundred yards away. The morning passed uneventfully. No weird sounds, plenty of normal forest noise. I started to think maybe Dad was right. Maybe my imagination had just run wild the week before. Around 2 in the afternoon, the sun was high, making the clearing bright and visible. I was scanning the area with my binoculars when I noticed something on the far side of the flat, where a power line cut created a sort of corridor through the trees. At first, I thought it was just a brown bush or stump about 200 yards away. But then the bush stood up. I froze. What I was looking at was about 7 feet tall, covered in brown hair or fur. It had these massive shoulders, probably twice as wide as my dad, who's a big guy. Its chest was thick, and its arms hung down past its knees. From that distance, I couldn't make out facial features clearly, but I could see it was looking right in my direction. I slowly reached for my radio, my eyes never leaving this thing. "Dad," I whispered, "there's something here, on the power line cut. It's standing up. It's not a bear." Dad didn't respond for a second, then, "I see it too. Don't move." The thing, I started thinking of it as brown fur in my head, just stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then it started moving, not away from us, but parallel to my position, still on the far side of the clearing, but moving with this weird, fluid stride. It was way too graceful for something that size. Then it did something that still gives me nightmares. It stopped, turned directly toward me, and let out this roar that seemed to shake the trees. It wasn't the same as the scream from the week before. This was deeper, more like a challenge. Then it started picking up rocks and throwing them in my general direction. They didn't come close to reaching me, but the message was clear. It knew I was there, and it wanted me gone. Next, it started slapping the ground with its hands, then stomping with its feet. The display was aggressive as hell. Then, and I swear this is true, it walked over to a small tree, maybe 4 inches thick at the base, grabbed it and ripped it out of the ground, roots and all, just tore it out like it was pulling a weed. It threw the tree to the side and roared again. I was paralyzed with fear. This thing wasn't just big and scary, it was intelligent. It was putting on a show of strength, trying to intimidate me, and it was working. After the tree-ripping display, Brown Fur turned and moved back into the thick forest on the far side of the clearing. The way it disappeared was freaky. 1 second it was there, the next it had melted into the tree line, despite its massive size. I radioed Dad again. "It's gone into the woods. What do we do?" "Meet me at the truck. Now, stay alert." I've never climbed down from a tree stand so fast in my life. I practically ran to our pickup, constantly looking over my shoulder. Dad was already there when I arrived, his face pale. "You saw it?" I asked, still breathing hard. "Yeah, same thing from last week. The knocking, the screaming. It was trying to scare us off. And today, Jesus." We got in the truck and got the hell out of there. On the drive home, we tried to process what we'd seen. We both knew what it was, even if we were afraid to say the name. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it. There was a 7-foot, hair-covered, intelligent creature out there, and it had made it very clear we weren't welcome. We never reported it officially. Who would believe us? But we've never gone back to that area either. Dad made me promise not to tell Mom the full story. We just said we got spooked by some weird noises and decided the hunting wasn't good enough to go back. Sometimes I look up reports of similar encounters in that area. Turns out the old Mercury mines have a history of strange sightings going back decades. Some locals won't go near the place. Now I understand why. I still go hunting with Dad, but always in different areas, far from those mines, and we always hunt in pairs now, never splitting up. I'm 17 now, and even with time and distance, I can't shake what happened. Sometimes I wake up at night hearing that scream or seeing brown fur rip that tree out of the ground. I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know there are things in the woods that shouldn't exist, but do. If you're ever hunting near Morton, Washington, stay away from those old Mercury mines. Something lives there, something territorial and strong, and it doesn't want company.